Serious, what revenge of yours hit the victim way worse than you thought it would, to the point you said maybe I shouldn't have done that? When I was in 9th grade, a kid ruthlessly bullied me for a few months. I had gotten sick of it and devised a plan for revenge. Every Wednesday we would get to sit outside for quiet reading time, and this kid would always go back inside for a piss. I had left and waited in the bathroom for him, peeking under the stall for his shoes to appear. He came in the bathroom, took his piss, then played on his Gamma Boy for the rest of reading time. The bell rang, and he walked out to the crowded stairwell still looking down at his Gamma Boy. I bumped into him. He fell face first down the stairs, knocked out 4 front teeth. Everyone on the stairs assumed he fell because he was playing his Gamma Boy. I feel pretty bad about it. Edit. I identified him by his shoes, used the bathroom as a place to pick up his trail. The bathroom he used was on the 2nd floor. Since it was the closest one to the door near where we were at outside, I knew he would have to use a set of stairs to go back down to his next class, one we had together, but I didn't know which one. I'm still mad at myself for this. When I was a preteen, my friend and I went to one of those day camps that picked us up in yellow school buses. One of the other kids on our bus was a younger boy I refer to as Ellie. Ellie was a faking terror. He would scream and spit and hump things, make a mess, and be as annoying and insufferable as possible. Riding the bus with him was a nightmare for everyone involved most of the time. So I came up with this idea. I found his family in the phone book and called up pretending to be a camp counselor. I told his mom that he was misbehaving on the bus and that he would either be disciplined or kicked out of the camp if he didn't stop. She bought it, said she would talk to him about it. I felt so faking smart. Until the next day, when a quiet, sullen Ellie showed up with a black eye. Edit. Apparently a lot of you don't believe that a preteen could convincingly sound like a camp counselor over the phone. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe the static of our connection made my fake adult voice more convincing, or Ella's parents were really gullible, or they were just looking for any old excuse to beat up their kid. I don't remember the precise details of a conversation I had like 17 years ago, but I really did call his family, and he really did show up with a black eye the next day. If I were going to lie about this, I'd have probably come up with a cooler story. Coworker and I had a friendly prank war spanning 2 years. Close to the end of our war, he iced my car. Icing involves taking the hose to the parking lot every half hour and spraying a light mist over your victim's car when it's below 0 out. I finished my 12-hour shift to find the car encased in 2 inches of ice. My revenge was, I thought, both more inconvenient for him and less freezing my balls off for me. I decided to take a bedsheet, drape it over his car, and only took 4 or 5 trips out with the hose the next night. So the next morning he finds his car with a 1/4 inch of ice freezing a sheet to his car. When he started peeling off the sheet, he pulled his windshield wipers, arms and all off of his ratty Jeep. I got a very pissed off phone call. I felt bad. The unwritten rule was embarrassing or inconvenient, no damage. I paid for repairs, and he got his revenge. He planted a dozen pieces of smoked herring throughout my car. Took me 6 months to find the last piece. Hidden under the carpet under the back window of my car. I can still smell it. I don't even own the car anymore. Had a big group of friends from 13 to 18. When we were 17, one of them stole my girlfriend. To be fair, he legitimately knew we were going out. He got her drunk and shagged her at a party. He knew I'd find out. Said to my face he didn't care. Tough shit, mate. It was her fault as well, of course. She wasn't passed out or anything like that. She'd been leading him on and was sober enough to consent, if drunk enough to get over the social stigma of actually doing it. So from that point on, our group of friends just cut this guy out of our circle. We stopped inviting him to stuff. If he tried to hang out, we told him to piss off. Mates that had been friends with him since primary school just ignored him. Initially, I was super proud of this show of solidarity from my brothers. My best mate was actually dating my now ex-girlfriend's best mate, and he split up with her because of her attitude about the whole thing, trying to defend her friend to him and make him hang out with them as a foursome. So, first summer back from uni, we are all 19 to 20. We see him in a local pub. I don't know what to do, decide to try and be cool about it and go up to say hi. He tells me to fuck off. I guess he blames me for all his friends cutting him out of his life. I don't get the chance to explain that I in no way asked them to do that. They just did what they saw as the right thing. 2 weeks later, we are in the same pub, and I see his younger sister. She's 17 now, very attractive. I start a conversation with her about her brother and how I feel bad about what we did. She says that it did really hurt him, but he's got some new friends now, mostly from uni, and is still with my ex, despite a long distance relationship over the uni semesters. He won't talk to any of us old friends though, which I think is a genuine shame. He's known some of the guys since we were 5. One drink leads to another with this girl, and we end up back at her house. Her parents are away. Her brother is staying at my ex's flat. She has her own flat, didn't go to uni, got a job, so empty house. We end up shagging. Next morning, her bro calls round just as I'm leaving. The look on his face as he works out what's happened. He goes from utter despair to absolutely mental in about half a second. Eventually I just had to leave. His sister finally managed to explain to him that it was nothing to do with revenge or anything, and that I was genuinely sorry for how we treated him. I don't know if she told him the whole conversation we had about how I'd feel bad as I didn't want to upset him anymore, and she convinced me to come back to hers by saying she was her own woman, could make her own decisions, and he wasn't due to be home at any time. If he hadn't have randomly turned up, I hope he'd have never known. He still won't accept my Facebook friend request though. Edit. To clarify a few little bits, and I believe it is customary to thank the kind stranger for my first ever edit gold. Thank you very much. I guess revenge implies thinking out the act or some time between acts. But at the age of 14 I was rolling up the hose in my backyard with a friend, since my mother told me to. The 2 girls next door were playing in their backyard and come over to talk. One 12 or so, the other 7. The 12-year-old happened to be standing on the hose, and I asked her to move. She did not. I pulled the hose hard enough to make her fall over. At this point the 7-year-old screamed bloody murder and ran right at me and bit my right on the stomach. She was not letting go, and I could see blood starting to stain my shirt. I grabbed her head and tried to pull her away, but nothing. So I just full on punched her right in her eye. I am not proud of this, but it had to be done. What was worse is that the house was owned by a local church where I happened to go to Boy Scouts. Everyone quickly knew I had punched a 7-year-old and given her a black eye, but no one cared why. Had a neighbor yell at my younger brother about his weight and I took it extra personal. Didn't know how to get him back without getting caught. Then I figured out I could place nails just under the back of the tire, so when he pulled out of the driveway he'd run over them. Turns out he was super poor and couldn't afford the repairs. My dad had to carpool with him to work for a month or so. I've never told anyone. Edit. Spelling. Edit 2. If my memory is correct, I believe my brother was doing some yard work or playing and became out of breath and winded, so he stopped. The adult must have been upset and then said something along the lines of, if you were skinnier you wouldn't have this problem. Edit 3. I was 10 or 11. Brother was 9. Last edit. I swear, my brother had been made fun of a lot in school for his weight because he couldn't keep up with other kids at lunch. If you've never been able to play with other kids because of medical problems, it's really degrading and hurts. So when an adult pointed out his insecurities, he felt like they were real and not in his head. In my stupid kid brain, I figured neither me or my bro should say what had happened. If my dad found out about the weight comments, it would come back around that I faked the guy's tires up. I realized the truth would have been best, but hey, I was 10. Really. The last edit. To all the nice people who are saying something along the lines of "you're no better," or even worse than that guy for ruining his tires and giving him financial trouble. A couple problems with that. 1. It wasn't thought out plan, my dudes. I was 10 and wanted to get simple revenge. It wasn't a plot to uproot this man's finances. To the main Reddit post is literally about realizing you went too far. 3. Some people may not have a brother or a bond with a brother that puts you instantly in attack mode when that sibling is hurt or in danger. I mean it, you hurt my brothers, I'm coming down on you like bombs. 4. Fuck that guy. He made his choice, I made mine. He got some mean karma for some mean words, and I'm sure as hell I got some karma from those punctures. Wanna mess with little brothers? Fuck am I say. When I was about 7 or 8 there was this girl at my school that was absolutely horrible. We'll call her Cindy. Cindy would run up to you and pull your hair out, steal the toy you were playing with, eat your snack at snack time, etc. In other words, she was a real bitch. One day as we were finishing up recess in the playground, she came up to me, pulled my hair, and took some with it. That was the last straw. As the teacher was gathering everyone inside and wasn't looking our way, I grabbed Cindy by her pigtail and dragged her over to the playground. Now this playground was built weird with a sort of enclosed area in the middle of 3 bridges that formed a triangle that you couldn't get out of. Sometimes us bigger kids would jump in there during hide and seek and climb out later. But Cindy couldn't because she was shorter. So I picked her up and threw her down in there and left to go back inside. It wasn't until about an hour later when the teacher realized that Cindy wasn't in class. I didn't say where she was, and it took them another half hour to find her. I got in trouble and had to spend the next week in the principal's office and lost my Gamma Boy for a month, but Cindy never messed with me again. Edit. A lot of people are wondering how the playground was laid out, so picture the playground like this, but where any of the bridges were, they were wild off on the bottom. I don't know why it was designed like that, but that's how the pit was formed. Also, as far as people saying it didn't sound like I had many regrets doing it, I did regret it immediately, since I was on my first playthrough of Pokemon Red when I had my Gamma Boy taken away from me for a month. I was devastated, and it was one of the longest months of my childhood. Now I couldn't care less. Way back in elementary school, a friend threw a piece of chalk that hit me square in the forehead. It was the most humiliating moment for younger me, as everyone who saw that started laughing their ass off. Kids are assholes. I plotted and planned my revenge to get back in the exact same fashion over the next couple of days. One fine day, weapon in hand, I find him perfectly placed a chalk throw away from me. I yell out his name and quickly launch the projectile as he spins around. For some reason he had his mouth open as he looked at me, and the piece of chalk flew directly into his throat. His eyes widen, and he starts choking. I stood frozen in shock as he fell on his knees coughing. Luckily somebody grabbed him from behind and thumped his back, so he swallowed the piece. An adult walks in. Cannot remember who it was at the time, but she looks at me and asks what happened. At this point I'm shaking, realizing that I narrowly killed my friend. I say it was a mint. My friend, also shaken at this point, laughs it off, saying it went straight into his throat and he didn't taste it. The adult shakes her head and says next time just hand it like a normal person and walks away. Years later, when we were moving away to another country, I remind him about the incident and come clean about the whole thing. He snaps and yells, "I knew it." This kid in my class at school kept insulting my mother, so I said to him that if he insults her one more time, that I'll get him after class. "Your mum's a slut," he replied. So after class I waited for him outside, and when he came out the classroom I got him in a headlock. He forced his way up out of it, and then he managed to crack the top of his head off a fire alarm, gashed his head open. He was bleeding all down his face and had to go to hospital. He was off school for 2 weeks after that too. I felt terrible about it. Edit. I can see this is causing quite a stir, so let me just clarify that this guy was a class idiot that misbehaved and always disrupted class. After I watched him hit his head off the fire alarm, I didn't see any blood. I had walked off at that point. Then he walked past me 2 minutes later, and his head was gushing, and he was crying. I felt so bad that I apologized to him whilst following him all the way to the nurse's room. I sat outside the nurse's room until the ambulance came. I didn't get in any trouble because he admitted it was his fault for goading me, and I was genuinely remorseful. Edit 2. For those who want to know about severity, it was a bad gash. His whole face was streaming down with blood. It looked like he'd been axed in the top of his head with a meat cleaver. He had to get his head glued back together. The scar after was about 2 inches in size. Edit 3. My only intention was to get him in a headlock and then give him a black eye. When he cracked his head, I decided that it wasn't any longer necessary to punch him, due to the fact that he squirmed in pain. This did in fact happen years ago, around the year of '99, if I remember correctly. The rules were different back then. Final edit. The question was, how was the relationship between you guys after? It was alright. He was happy that he got a few weeks off school. Everyone hates school. I was glad to see him back at school. He showed me his scar. We laughed about it. We both knew that it was an accident. We moved on. We had mutual respect for each other after. Glad you enjoyed my cracking story, guys, and thank you all for the upvotes. When I was either 6 or 7, I had been bullied by my neighbors on the bus. They had harassed me with toy knives, which at the time I thought were real, and had all around been very disgusting, with me trying to talk about sex and other things around me, and trying to take away my innocence, which at the time I had no clue what they were talking about. I had had enough of it, and I had told my mother, which told their mother what had happened, and I wouldn't necessarily say they didn't deserve what had happened to them, but I was a very empathetic kid, and what happened to them had scarred me for most of my childhood. Their mother told their father their bad behavior, and had beaten them quite badly. They left me alone for the remainder of my time being their neighbor, but I saw the cuts, scars, and bruises that had been left on their young bodies, and how their moods had changed afterwards from bratty little kids to completely silent and somewhat oppressed. This one wasn't really a planned revenge, but it's one I still feel guilty about whenever I think about it. When I was a kid, I was extremely easy to scare with jump scares, and I hated them. I would always enter fight or flight mode whenever something jumped out at me, and then I'd be mad as hell afterward. When my buddies caught onto this, they made it their business in life to jump out at me and scare me any chance they got. Despite my hate of being scared, I was a huge fan of Halloween, and I had a Halloween party every year, either close to or on the big day. Naturally, this was the night when all my friends would do their damnedest to scare me so bad that I would bolt and run. They succeeded a few times when we were all under 9 years old, but something shifted in me the year I turned 10, and none of us knew it until it was too late. As usual, I had my big Halloween party. As usual, all my buddies were there, and as usual, one of them wanted to try and scare the pants off me. About midway through the evening, I went down the hall to use the restroom, and while I was in there, my friend, I'll call him Aaron, scampered down the hall after me and hid in a darkened doorway. I came out of the restroom, started down the hall, and Aaron jumped out at me and grabbed my arm. Ordinarily, something like this would have made me bolt like a little chicken shit, but for some reason that night the flight side of my fight or flight got turned off. The moment he grabbed me, I whirled and punched him square in the face without even thinking about what I was doing. It was all pure instinct, and after impact I realized what I'd just done and freaked out. Aaron wrenched his mask off and was clutching his face and groaning, or so I thought, and I yelled for my dad, concerned I had really hurt my friend. My dad and all my other friends came running down the hall to find out what had happened. My dad flipped on the hallway light, and what greets us? Aaron with his face covered in blood. I'm instantly horrified, thinking I busted his nose, but as I'm spewing apologies to him, I begin to realize he's not groaning, he's laughing. He grabs me by the hand I'd punched him with and yells, "What are you apologizing for?" That was freaking awesome, and he yanked my hand up over my head like I was a boxing champ and starts telling everyone how cool it was of me to just haul off and slug him. If you haven't guessed, Aaron was a pretty cool kid. He thought it was great that I'd suddenly found the courage to defend myself. My dad helped get him cleaned up, though he insisted on keeping his now bloody costume on, and inspected his nose. Thankfully it wasn't actually broken, but I still feel a wave of guilt when I remember the sight of his face covered in blood, and remember the feeling of my fist hitting him in the schnoz. I'll always be grateful to him for handling it so well, and encouraging me for standing up for myself, but I still feel so guilty about decking him that I can't even imagine how I would feel if I had actually broken his nose. High school. Oh man, this poor kid I used to work with at Wendy's. Kevin. He was a juvenile delinquent. He was a few years older than me, little bit bigger than me, had nasty tattoos on his neck, and supposedly was out of jail on work release. He tried to be a tough guy and bully me whenever we worked together. Stuff like generally talking smack unprovoked, getting real close up in my face, and that stance, where you puff out your chest and pull your arms back, like you're gonna swing. The most irritating was when he would walk right up in my face then flinch, like he was gonna throw a punch at me, then just laugh, and say some rude crap. I got along with just about everyone at work, and he did somewhat, but we just did not fit together. One day the exchanges between us were so apparent and obviously stressed, everyone working was talking about me fighting him. I dispelled these rumors as I wanted to keep my job, but my destiny on this day said otherwise. First was the backdoor incident. The store had a large backdoor with a peephole in it, and it could only be opened from the inside. There was a buzzer outside that employees would push if they wanted back in. Well, Kevin was locked outside, and his patience, while awaiting his re-entry, had run out. Instead of tapping the buzzer, this guy was mashing it and holding it down, while everyone inside went nuts. We were all busy, and I was running to the back to grab some heavy boxes. Holding these boxes, I was gonna open the back door. While I walked past, I tried to push on the door, but it wouldn't open. I leaned into it, but couldn't push much more cause of the boxes I was holding. I was in a hurry, so I yelled, "Get back, I'm gonna kick the door." He did not hear me over the loud constant buzzing. I gave that door a swift "this is Sparta" kick, and it opened about 3 inches then bounced closed again. What the fuck? I kicked it again and it opened, revealing abashed and somewhat upset Kevin. He had been trying to look in the peephole when I kicked the door. I had just broken the crap out of his nose. Like the tip was almost touching his cheek, bright red purple, swollen eyes, broken. He was pissed. Immediately I started apologizing and backing away from him, but he came at me like a rabid monkey. Quickly we were surrounded by employees and separated. I was told to go up front and manage fries, and to not come into the back part of the store until Kevin left to the hospital. Then the final event, less than 10 minutes later. I was working the fries, which entails grabbing a metal basket out of boiling hot oil and dumping the fresh fries into an adjacent tray. I was doing this and everyone around me was talking about how I just broke Kevin's face. On his way leaving our store for the hospital, he decided to come right up to me again and try to instigate a fight while I was dumping some fresh fries. Kevin pulled his signature move of flinching at me like he was gonna throw a punch. I retaliated by returning my own flinch with the basket I was holding. I didn't actually hit him with an incredibly hot fry basket, but I forgot about the boiling hot oil still clinging to the basket. When I flinched at him and shook the basket, tiny flaming hot drops of grease splattered his face and neck. I had just broken his nose on accident, then threw boiling hot oil on his face on accident. Instant fight. On the ground. I'm a wrestler, so his freshly broken and burned nose was just smashed and wiped across a dirty floor for a few seconds before it was broken up. He was an absolute mess. He left for the hospital. I got sent home. That was it. No charges. No questions from my manager or managers after. No more being scheduled with Kevin. Not even any paperwork about 2 vicious assaults and fights in the same day. I felt really bad, but simultaneously kinda justified. Both incidents were honest accidents which could have easily been avoided if he weren't such a jerk. I still felt like the outcome was worse than reasonable. Edit. Weak attempt at formatting into paragraphs. My sister used to kick my ass on the regular. She had mad anger problems and would go berserk over the littlest things. One time I turned the light on while she was trying to sleep. She beat me up, and I ended up going to prom with bruises all over me. All through the years, I never hit her back. I was a super sensitive kid, and if I ever hit back, I ended up crying to my mom about how I loved my sister and hated to hurt her. After I graduated, she had calmed down a bit, but she still had issues. Coming back from a small party one night, and she is back on her old bullshit, just getting mad over something stupid and going totally crazy over it. We get home and get out of the car and say I'm driving home. She keeps saying I'm too drunk, even though I'd only had 2 to 3 mini beers. She grabs the back of my shirt, and I'm so pissed off at her, I turn around really fast with my fist out to hit her arm or something. She immediately lets out a blood-piercing scream and drops to the ground. Blood is spurting everywhere. She leaves a trail as she runs inside and wakes up our mom and dad. Turns out, I broke her nose pretty faking bad, but my mom and dad kept saying it couldn't be that bad, because I had done it, and that she must have really been faking with me for me to have done something like that after all these years of her beating on me. I felt so awful. I cried and tried to say sorry, but she ended up going to the hospital. I don't feel so bad now, because she purposely never paid the bill, thinking she could bully me into paying it, and she never lets it go. She always says I'm the reason her credit and stuff is bad, and that she still has collections agencies calling her over the ear bill. I ain't paying that shit. Consider it payment for the years of abuse. I had a girlfriend cheat on me, lie about it, when I confronted her and gave her the chance to come clean and work through it, and stalk me after I broke up with her. We were quite young, 17, so it was all very overdramatic, but I did love her a lot and was hurt by what she did. At the same time I was very done and not interested in reconciling. She didn't get the hint. I asked her nicely many times, then not so nicely, then demanded she fuck off. She would, for a while, but then she'd show up drunk and try and pick fights, insult me, and be sincerely hurtful. I eventually had enough, as you do. I told a couple of choice people in her school, different to mine, what she'd done, with gory details. She'd soaked off her ex in his shitty car, thought she'd get dragged for it, and that would be that. Well, turns out she was a bitch in all other aspects of her life too. Apparently she was loathed at school, and people jumped on this news like starving beasts on fresh meat. I had text sendems from people I didn't even know asking to confirm the news, which I ignored, because I was really done with the whole situation by now. I eventually heard from other friends at that school that people had not let it drop, and had even stuck posters around the school with pictures of her, announcing what she'd done, offering her services with her phone number, photoshopping bananas into her mouth, etc. It was brutal, and she had to change schools in her final year. I did feel a bit bad. If I'd known it would go that far I might have rethought telling those people. At the same time, she hurt me badly. She refused to leave me alone despite months of chances, and the other students reacted so viciously, because apparently she was a total asshole to everyone in the school. So, I don't know. I sure as hell didn't expect that, though. Some girl hit my car in a hit and run. There was a witness to the crime, so the police were able to track her down. When I was asked if I wanted to press charges I went for it. Turns out she had no license or insurance. She kept trying to fight the charges, but wound up getting sued by my insurance, having to pay me restitution via the court system, and 4 separate charges between all her crimes, all of which included a decent fine. She was some 18-year-old single mom. I felt super bad by the end of it. Edit to add details. The damage wasn't significant. There was a small dent and a large scratch. It was all cosmetic damage. My deductible was small, but the total bill to my insurance was about $3 grand. My car is over 10 years old and had some other scratches already. I was way more upset that someone hit me and drove off than I was about the actual damage. I wouldn't have even bothered to get it fixed if the girl hadn't driven off. My pursuing her and pressing charges was 100% fueled by revenge, and her life got pretty faked up from it. Yeah, what she did wasn't right, but I can emphasize with her being a scared 18-year-old who made a bad choice while caught up in the moment. Also, I'm not justifying her behavior because she had a kid, but it does make me feel bad for her. Being a single parent, as a woman or man, is a really expensive thing, and having a bunch of fees on top of that financial burden has got to suck. Had a lawyer a few years back who was a piece of absolute shit. Would go months between returning phone calls, constantly late with court filings to the point the courts multiple times moved to have the case dismissed from lack of action, lied to me constantly about anything and everything, refused to be fired. Seriously, when I told him he was fired he just ignored me and kept presenting himself as my lawyer. I had to get the courts involved to get him to stop. Lied about me. Our client has been unreachable. We are considering dropping them. I tried to call you 84 times in the last 3 months and you didn't answer or return a single one. When I finally did fire him, he told me I had to be in court on a specific date. That didn't work for me. At a specific time. That didn't work for me. Or else the motion To withdraw wouldn't be accepted. So I got to the courtroom and the judge was super nice, but confused as to why I was there, and when I told him the story the judge just goes, "Yay, this is all done electronically. Not sure why your lawyer would tell you that other than to be a dick." Needless to say, by the end of all this I was pissed and wrote a 10-page bar complaint about 4 different lawyers and their office's unethical behavior. Well, the Bar Association decided this was a firm-wide encouraged pattern of behavior and threw the book at the 4 partners. Disbarred for 5 years, restitution to clients, and only allowed to practice under supervision for a period of 5 years after they return. I felt a little bad, but goddamn I was so faking sick of being jerked around. My best friend slept with my son's father while I was pregnant. Then she got on drugs and went to prison. I found out. I had been helping her mother care for her daughters, writing her each week, visiting her twice a week, putting money on her books, everything. I wrote her, told her what I had found out, and then cut all contact. The only thing I continued to do was help care for her daughters. I cut off all emotional support when she needed it the most, even when she was transferred into the federal system and went states away. Returned all letters, refused all phone calls. She was released a year or so ago. I did not pick her up as originally planned. When she showed up at my house to collect her daughters, they were afraid of her. Now, I feel like I may have been too mean. She wasn't thinking properly when she decided to sleep with my son's father, and I wasn't a very good friend when it counted. Either way, we are speaking terms again, but I keep her at arm's length. We mostly just communicate for her children's sake. Edit. Just because people have asked. Yes, I was in a relationship with my son's father at the time. We had been dating about 3 years. Obviously, that ended as soon as I found out. In elementary school there was a bully kid who would make fun of me. I had a bad bowl cut and was pretty small, so it wasn't surprising. Me and my friends usually just ignored him. Anyway, one day this kid from Brazil moved into the house next to mine. He was a year older. We used to play soccer together every day after school. I mentioned to him once that this kid would call me names, and usually while walking home from school, would follow behind me taunting me. One day I'm leaving school and this kid is going slowly behind me on his bike shouting stuff. Just dumb kid stuff, you know. Brazil kid comes out of nowhere, knocks the kid off his bike, and just starts beating him. Bully is on the grass crying and bleeding. Brazil kid grabs the bike and gives it to me. "You can keep this," and then walks away. I didn't know what to do. I just laid the bike next to the kid and walked home. He wasn't at school for like a week. Later in life I found that kid had a really crappy home situation with abusive parents. I was 10 at the time. Always felt bad for that. Quit bullying me though. I still occasionally see that Brazilian guy. Don't think he even remembers it. Cool on him for helping in his way. I just think it went too far. 9th grade honors English class. The teacher didn't like me. Only teacher I ever had that didn't like me. Others would get frustrated with how my lack of effort at times, but still liked me as a person. She just flat out didn't like me. One of the reasons was that she didn't like athletes because they would miss her class regularly for travel for games. And I played 3 sports, so I was missing a good bit. Now, I was also missing for academic stuff like math/science competitions and quiz bowl tournaments, but she was particularly bothered about missing for sports. Case in point, she would intentionally double the amount of homework due the day after long away games knowing that the players wouldn't have the time to finish it all. And shocker, she didn't check homework every single day, but always checked after away games. I've written about her before, but she also would give me 70s and low 80s on papers without any red marks on them, but people around me would have red marks all over their paper, and would have 90s. After one particularly low grade on an assignment that I knew I had actually done really well on, I inquired about it. Her exact response was that I was only doing 70% of my ultimate capability and the others were doing 90% of this. So I specifically asked, does that mean my paper can be better than someone else's, but be 20 plus points lower? And she said yes. And to show this wasn't just me misunderstanding things, she recommended me for an advanced writing class a year earlier than students were supposed to be able to take it. So if those two things weren't bad enough, she gave us an opportunity for extra credit toward the end of the year. We had to go to a local college's rendition of Antigone, write a 2,500 word paper on it, and tie it into what we discussed in class on the play, and also turn an article and playbill. It was due on a Monday and the play was only going on Friday Sunday, so there was no way to turn it in ahead of time. But I was going to miss class that Monday all day for an academic competition, representing the school. And it was the biggest one of the year, like had to place top 10 in a previous competition to qualify. So it's obviously an excused absence. I told her for an entire week prior to the play that I was going to miss on Monday, and she told me multiple times to turn it in first thing Tuesday morning. So I go to the play, write the paper, go to the academic competition Monday and place first in one category and second in another, and then Tuesday morning before basketball workouts at 7 AM I go to her room to turn in the assignment. She refuses to take it because it's late, and she didn't recall ever suggesting that I could turn it in on Tuesday. She told me 4 times. Her reasoning: 1. Another student that missed for the competition was able to turn it in. But that student lived across the street from the school. I lived 20 minutes away and couldn't drive. 2. My mom was a teacher at the school, so I could have just sent it with her. Except I had been told to turn it in Tuesday, so there was no reason for me to think to have my mom turn in my assignment for me. Plus she has her own students and classes to worry about. 3. I could have done the work Monday evening, which wouldn't be fair to the other students. So I went into the metadata for the paper that showed the last time it had been saved was Saturday afternoon. She still refused to grant me any credit for it. So I was out the $25 for the ticket, the time that it took, plus it really inconvenienced my mom who had to pick me up Friday from practice, rush me home to shower and change, then rush me back downtown for the play, and then come pick me up again 2 hours later. So my mom was pretty pissed about it too. This teacher also prided herself on the fact that nobody had ever made an A on her final exam. She thought she was the toughest teacher ever. Really, she just loaded students up with a bunch of busy work. So the last day of class she gave a few minutes at the end of class and asked, "What's your biggest wish?" to the class as a whole. I piped up, "I wish for an A on the exam," and she laughed and said, "Yay, and I wish for $1 million and not to have to deal with you anymore." So, all of that sets up the final exam. It's 100 questions, and then a 5-point bonus question that asked those generic "what was your favorite part of the class? What did you learn?" etc. We got 2 hours to take the exam, and students that finished early had to wait until 1 hour was up, so that there was just 1 point of people getting up and leaving rather than being distracting throughout. So I finished the 100 questions in about 20 minutes. So I spent the remaining part of the hour just blasting her in the bonus question. I said that I'm not sure I learned anything, and pointed to her never making any comments on how to improve my writing. I said my favorite part of the class was it finally being over and not having to deal with her sheet anymore, and brought up a number of other little things that happened on top of that mentioned above. And I said that she was by far the worst teacher I had ever had, and that the school is worse off with her teaching the entire 9th grade. The bell rings for the hour, and I'm the only person of the entire 110 students to leave at the hour mark. Now, on exam days the teacher doesn't proctor their own exam, so that they are available to answer questions, or if the classes are split among different rooms. So I have to wait for my mom to finish proctoring a different exam, so I'm just sitting out in Breezeway. The teacher finds me, holding my exam, with tears in her eyes, and tells me to meet her in the principal's office. She then storms off, so I head over. As I'm waiting there I recount what happened to the soccer coach who is sitting there cause he made some comment about "surprised to see you sent in here." Eventually she comes back in with my mom, who she pulled out of proctoring an exam, and we all go in to see the principal. She's crying, screaming, literally choking every minute or so. After about 45 minutes of me spilling everything I'd gone through that year, all things I'd already vented to my mom about plenty of times, the principal finally looks at her and goes, "How much was the question worth?" She said 5 bonus points, and he says, "Then just don't give him the bonus points." So I made a 98 on the final instead of a 103. Missed 2 questions. Every other student got the bonus points and the next highest grade was an 81. thinking she would get the last laugh. I noticed a few days before grades were due that one of my assignments from the second week of class all the way back in August had been dropped 10 points. My final grade ended up being a 94.4, which was a B at the time. But I couldn't prove that she had altered my grade. I just had them in all in a spreadsheet to determine my grade ahead of time. Should have been a 95.2, but nothing that would prove anything, since I could have just typed it wrong. I didn't. The summer after, the school decided to change to a 10-point scale, and so 90 plus was an A, so my B became an A. She also had to have her homework assignments each week signed off by the department chair, and she had to start accepting assignments via email. 2 years later she was fired after other students started having real issues with her. Prior to me, the administration just thought it was a case of students complaining about the hard teacher. Still think she deserved every bit of it, but I certainly didn't think it would set in motion her getting fired. Though, again, she deserved it. Hopefully people are still reading. She sucked. In high school, would be late elementary in the US, I guess, there was this kid who wasn't unpopular per se, but a little awkward. Last day before the summer holidays, he plays with us during the morning break. Things get a little rough, and there's some light wrestling involved. Nothing too serious, no one got hurt except some red ears. But the kid turned out to not be the silverback of our schoolyard. We walk back into class and continue the day as any other. Get on the bus home, he's still being a little sour with the rest. Start enjoying our summer holidays. Yay. A week later my dad summons me into his study, fuming and enraged. He got a letter by the kid's dad according to which I had beaten the boy up so badly that he came home sniveling. According to the letter, he was in so much pain that he could barely walk. The letter laid out in detail how the boy would not be able to enjoy the family we're going on the first day of summer despite his grave injuries. I was expected to better come up with one hell of an injury, because otherwise we'd get fire and fury from the police and their lawyers. After some frantic back and forth shouting, my father eventually believed me that I didn't, in fact, beat the guy up. My father wrote a conciliatory letter to try to work out what precisely had happened. The other family wasn't having that though, and began collecting statements from witnesses. Turns out that several teachers stated in writing that the kid appeared to be completely fine throughout the entire day, did not appear to be in distress or pain, and had interacted with them and other students completely normal. Oopsie. The other family concluded that there had been a misunderstanding. I was pretty pissed at the guy, because I seriously was expecting to get beaten up badly at home and be in a ton of trouble had this gone otherwise. So once school started, I waited until our entire male class was assembled and then told the story with appropriate snark to the rest of the class. Nasty snitch move. From that moment on, that kid spent years at the bottom of the hierarchy and was the butt of every joke for a long time. That time must have been really shit for him. I regret that deeply, because the kid was actually genuinely nice, if a little awkward, and grew up to be a pretty decent adult. And to his credit, once school started he came to me and tried to explain the situation to me. The gist was that it were his overprotective parents who were the real trouble, not him. But I was so pissed because I could have gotten into so much trouble over nothing, just out of someone else's spite. But during the entire summer I hadn't even got an apology or any admission of wrongdoing, and was left doubting myself. There was also no attempt by the parents at getting us to talk to one another. That's deeply regrettable. I wish someone clever had helped us talk us through that situation. Not exactly a tale of revenge, citizen, as I uphold the law and exercise my rights as an officer to eliminate threats to society if peaceful resolutions are no longer an option. In high school, 2 classmates were killed by a train they were attempting to speed past. Some of their friends decorated their lockers the next day, as friends do, because they cared about them and loved them. They were not some of the popular teens in the school, and one of the uptight preppy girls complained to the principal that their locker shouldn't be decorated because they didn't do anything for the school, which who cares. But since her family was a pillar of the community, she got her way and the vice principal had the decorations taken down. I was in the office doing tar things when this went down, and when the girl left to go back to her class I left with her and stopped her down in the hallways and asked her what her problem was with people grieving and losing a friend. She said they weren't important and no one cares. Told her I hoped she had to suffer losing people close to her suddenly like our classmates and I wouldn't feel sorry for her. Then told her I hoped she'd get AIDS. About a year later her mom discovered she had a brain tumor which killed her within a year. Her grandparents also died in a house fire the same year. Feel bad for the family. Never felt bad for her. Have to go all the way back to 2nd grade for this. So I'm not sure how it was at your elementary school, but in ours, birthdays were a big deal. Usually they involved the kids' parents coming in with sweets and goodie bags and everything. In my class there was a super annoying devil child which I'm convinced was spawned by Satan himself. Let's call her Millie. Millie was as bad of a kid as there ever could be. Talking back to the teacher, never doing her work, insulting how poor she thought the other kids were, and resorting to physical violence against everybody, especially the other boys. She knew that she could get a pass, just because she was a girl, and for some reason the teacher never really seemed to pick up on how horrible she was. There was something particular about this little Hannibal Lecter though. Lambs. She was absolutely obsessed with little white lambs. They were her favorite animal. She had them everywhere. Book bag, temporary tattoos, notebooks, t-shirts, etc. Some of you can instantly see where this is going. Being from a Persian family, our diet consisted of a fair amount of lamb. And it was around this fact that my best friend at the time, let's call him Josh, and I hatched a plan. We'd both gotten sick of Millie, but my birthday was coming up. Instead of asking my mom to bring over cupcakes, her usual routine, I asked my dad to cook some authentic Persian kebab kubide, so I could have my favorite meal at school. Being the only brown kid in my class I think I passed it off as a cultural enrichment exercise. The trap was set. On my birthday, we all stayed in for lunch and my dad brought over a huge tray of kebab. It was a huge hit. Kids were scarfing these things down like there was no lunch for the rest of the week. I distinctly remember looking over at Millie, who had just finished her first one. Josh wanted to set the final stage of the plan into action, but I held off. I wanted her to eat more. The best part? She was wearing a pink t-shirt with a picture of a lamb on it. I remember thinking at the time why she hadn't asked anyone what meat it was, as it was obviously a red meat. It now occurs to me that she just figures it's beef, and that to spare her feelings, her parents have never told her that people actually eat lamb. We waited until she had eaten 3 kebabs. She pushed the paper plate away from her. Seemingly she was done with her meal. Josh and I launched the final stage. We both walked up close to her table, and Josh asked me, "Say op, that's some good kebab. How do you even make such a thing?" And in the most obviously fake TV announcer voice I could, I said, "Well, it's easy. You just take a lot of beef and an equal part of lamb meat and mix it all together." Millie's eyes got wider than I knew eyes could get. She turned and asked me what I said. Josh simply told her it was made from that and pointed to the little lamb on her shirt. The reason why I regret this revenge choice so much is because in that moment, I still remember watching her soul crumble. As horrible as she was still just a kid. Her eyes welled up immediately as she looked at the remains of her plate, then back down at her shirt. That's when the crying started. And when I say crying, I mean bawling. And when I say bawling, I mean inconsolable. She cried so loud I remember the teacher being mortified, shaking her by the shoulders, and asking her what was wrong. She had no words. Just more tears. At the time, I hate to admit, I was loving it. But now, all this time later, it still bothers me what I chose to do. You might think I'm being too hard on myself. After all, she was never in physical danger like in the other stories on this thread. But what will always stick with me is the fact that this all happened around lunch. She was whisked off to the office where, as I was leaving at 3 PM, I could still hear her crying. And she was never the same after that either. Not as mean, sure. But I don't think I saw her smile even once for the rest of the year. Her family ended up moving away that summer. I'm sure it was unrelated, but that just means I never saw her again. TLDR, girl is mean. Girl loves lambs. I feed her lamb. Over a decade ago, when I was a teenager, we used to have bonfires out in a secret spot in the woods. One night we went out there, and another group we didn't know also came through. They seemed nice, and were doing their own thing most of the night. It was a big open space, so our groups stayed mostly separate. We brought 230 racks for about 6 people, so we obviously didn't end up finishing all of it. We got up and left at around 1 AM while the other group was still there. We get out of the woods and into our car, only to immediately see 3 of the guys from the group emerge from the woods. They blocked our car off and demanded we give them our beer or they'll kick our ass. The driver laughs in the guy's face, drops into gear and peels out toward them. They jump out of the way. We get away laughing and yelling insults at the idiots. Well, we are teenagers with chips on our shoulders, and somebody has wronged us. So, we went back and smashed out every window and headlight on the main guy's decked out VW Jetta. We later found out that he was friends with a few mutual acquaintances. He told them about the incident at a party, conveniently leaving out the fact that they attempted to rob us and said it cost them upwards of $2,000 because they had no insurance. Our revenge was definitely way out of proportion, but I still don't really feel bad. That guy was trash. I was jealous of a kid in my senior year creative writing class, high school. We had to submit weekly fiction pieces, and everyone in class would read each other's stories and discuss in class. This guy never wrote his own pieces. He actually had the balls to submit short stories he found online. Our teacher was not technologically savvy and way too trusting of his students, so it was never obvious to him. The kid received glowing praise every week in class, and it infuriated a lot of people to sit there and watch the teacher gush over this fraud. I finally decided to do something and snitched. He was nailed for cheating and failed the class, resulting in a failing grade for his English requirement. This was problematic for him because he had applied early decision to one school and it was now late into senior year when he could no longer apply to schools. Because of a failing grade, this crushed his GPA and somehow the university was also aware of the cheating. They reversed their admittance and he had to spend a year at home. During that year at home, when he otherwise would have been at school, he was hit by a car and is now paralyzed from the neck down. Junior year in high school, we had gathered at a friend's house to play some D&D. Someone had brought a 2-liter Coke bottle that had been filled with tequila. We had mostly ignored the alcohol and focused more on the game. All but one of us had kept our drinking reasonable. One guy had decided to get completely sloshed. He was stumbling around, being obnoxious and making lots of racket. Friend's mom was in her room, and then he started puking. We took him outside, but he kept coming back in the house and throwing up on the carpet. We had finally had enough of his shit and decided to take him home. We loaded him into the back of my friend's pickup and took him to his house. It was late and his parents were asleep. We opened the door and pushed him in. We could see him kinda stumbling across the living room through the front window. One of my friends was like, you know what, fuck him, and started ringing the doorbell and pounding on the front door. Our drunk friend stopped and faced us with a look of absolute horror on his face. We all hopped in the pickup bed and sped off. As we were driving away, we could see lights coming on all over his house. 16 years old, drunk as shit, and wearing vomit-covered clothes. His parents were less than happy. We didn't see him for a long time. We probably should've just went outside with him, locked the door, and stayed with him until he had settled down and sobered up a little. I kinda felt sorry for him after his parents had gotten through with him. I haven't actually told this one to anyone, not too proud of it. A guy couple houses down from a house came up to me and my dog and kicked into my dog because we were playing too loud on the street and supposedly woke him up. He was very clearly pissed drunk though. No warning, no nothing either, just kicks into my dog on the behind. Now that doesn't really sit well with me for obvious reasons, but he is drunk. I'm barely 13, yelled at him for being an asshole, and took the poor dog inside. However, it felt like I let my friend down, so I decided to take my revenge on his car. Do you know the potato method? Where you push a potato into the exhaust and the engine doesn't start? Well, I decided to sneak out at midnight, brought a smaller hammer with me, and 14 potatoes. I only managed to hammer and push in 9 though. Still, felt like that's gonna be enough. Sure enough, the car didn't start. Got a lump in my throat when I overheard my parents talk about how he got fired because some punks pulled a prank on him. Apparently he got in trouble for being late a couple of times before. Still, you do not kick someone's dog without any retaliation. He did get another job later. I don't know if he ever found out who he got the exhaust potatoes from. So, back in junior high, one dude, for the sake of the story we'll call him Werner, who was in the same math class as me, and was a continuous to everyone, but often to me especially. After some months I decided I had had enough. I went to a really active turtle/tortoise online forum, and in the subsection for buying and selling the animal/equipment I posted a message that went something like this. Hi, I'm looking to start my turtle hobby. I need everything to start and a turtle, maybe several. My budget is pretty big, and I'm willing to buy a whole terrarium as well. I'm best reached by phone on Monfree between 12 to 4 p.m. Kind regards, Werner. Basically I expected him to get a few calls during the school hours and get his mobile confiscated a couple of times, but what followed was an absolute onslaught of people trying to sell their turtles and equipment to him. His phone was ringing constantly during the afternoon and he started to get more and more irate with this. Often started screaming to the people trying to sell their stuff to him. Then finally one math class, he gets a call. It's about a turtle. He completely flips out and smashes his phone and goes completely mental. The teacher can't get him to calm down and he shoves the teacher. This leads him to getting kicked out of the course, mandatory therapy in anger management, and he had to repeat the grade because of the math course. Sure, he was an ass, but he didn't deserve to lose a year out of his life due to that. To this day, he has no idea how the phone calls started. Great, the one time I have something to contribute, and it's about a time when I went too far being an asshole. Oh well. When I was in 5th grade, I was picked on by some bully in my class. Nothing physical, just dumb shit like making fun of me and calling me names, etc. Certainly nothing that warranted what I did to him. I still feel disgusted about doing it to this day, but this was my revenge plot. There was a rumor going around that his parents were physically abusive because he didn't like to go home after school and he would come to class with bruises and whatnot sometimes. The guy was really not bright and was easy to anger, so one day I started talking shit to him and I laid it on thick. And when he got to the point where he was visibly shaking from anger, I started saying stuff like, "What are you gonna do about it? You gonna hit me? I bet you're too chicken to hit me." And sure enough, he punched me square in the face, bloodied my nose pretty good. Immediately after he hit me, I smiled and told him, "I bet you're gonna get suspended. I wonder what your parents are gonna think about this." The look of horror on his face when I said that, and he realized he fell right into my trap, honestly haunts me to this day. After he got back from suspension he never said a word to me again. During middle school, me and my best friend at the time were playing poker or some other card game involving gambling. There was some sort of disagreement and I was certain that he owed me money. He felt like he didn't owe me anything. At some point I was told by someone else that he was not going to pay me because I was a QSIP, or rough translation as whole. I got mad, and because I had known him well for years I knew a lot of stuff about him. I started to use this info to turn everyone against him. This in turn made it a popularity contest which I won, mainly because I was the bigger asshole and had no problem spilling everything I knew about him to all I knew with some added stuff to further humiliate him. In the end he was bullied by most people he used to consider friends. I later found out that he needed some therapy during those times. Always went straight home after school, which was not typical behavior for him or for most kids in my country during middle school. Especially for him because, like me, he was part of the popular kids. Years later I've apologized to him and we became friends again. Our lives headed to different directions, but we still see each other every now and then. This is pretty much the only thing I regret in my life. A feud over few euros turned my friend's life into misery for a couple of years. I'm just glad he pulled through, but even though he forgave me, I don't think I can ever forgive myself. Had a homophobic teacher's assistant. One day me and my friend are faking around. We had been close, not love each other close, but calling each other love and darling was a normal greeting. When messing around she sneered at us and said that's not right. Men shouldn't be like that to each other. God doesn't condone it. Or something to that effect. Can't remember the exact words. Well, my friend happened to be gay and offended. I happened to be fairly camp and wanted to make a joke out of it to try and defuse the situation. Only this treatment continued and we got treated like dog shit by this person. So we did the logical thing. We made posters and created a homosexual club, handed out leaflets and put the posters everywhere. When we handed her our leaflet she was in front of a lot of people and simply refused to come. We found it funny as fuck because fuck this beach. Then the principal came around because he was interested in the club and the leaflet. Oh, and because there was a clause written in small writing that said we reserve the right to tell homophobic people to fuck off. We explained the situation to him and he warned us that he would look into it. End of the week we found out that this tar had not only been fired but barred from working in any school again. My teacher, as it turns out, was batting for the other side and had already reported this behavior to the principal in the past. Just they needed more proof. I felt really bad over the weekend. I made a woman lose her job and her profession. Then on a Monday I came in and every single teacher had a copy of my leaflet and was laughing their ass off. So the regret slowly wore off. I was friends with this girl since we were 11. She was kind of awful, but I still hung out with her. She tried to embarrass me in front of our friends and was always trying to tell me what to eat and what to wear. It was weird. When we were in our mid-20s, she finally found a guy suitable for her and her family, rich, same religion, rich etc., and got engaged. I don't know why, but she really wanted to swing, even though her fiancé didn't really want to do it. But he went along with it. It was a disaster. She got hers, he didn't get his. They fought. She still insisted on seeing the other dude to swing with him. It was just a mess. Anyway, one day we got into this huge fight because she didn't approve of my new boyfriend and whatever. I was so fed up with her and her shit that I told my mom, who happened to be very good friends with her mom, about the swinging, knowing my mom would tell her mom. It just spiraled out of control and everyone in her family found out. Her finance, who was such a nice dude, was so embarrassed, and I guess I just didn't think about how it would affect him. I still feel bad for that guy. I really hope he got a prenup. Told this one here before, but here it is. This is 100% true, and I still feel like a dickhead to this day. Might not be revenge exactly, but felt like it. In middle school, I had a bully/tormentor wheel called Chuck. Chuck was about 2 years older than everyone because he'd been held back twice. Chuck was a monster. Huge kid, especially since he was an 8th grader in 6th grade and regularly tortured half the class. He picked on me most often out of the group, but everyone despised him. One day, after he grabbed me by the backpack and threw me against the lockers, I came home upset. My dad said, "Don't worry about him. Guys like that will be changing your car's oil one day." Fast forward a month or so, and we're in art class. Teacher leaves the room and Chuck starts laying into me and threatening to beat me up. I'd had enough, so replied with something like, "Fine, Chuck. I don't care. Beat me up. No one here will laugh at me because you're bigger than all of us. You can beat up anyone in the room. Who cares? Do it. No one will give a damn." At this point the class started getting my back and laughing, yelling insults at him. Still remember him looking panicked and saying, "Shut up, I'm sick of you talking. You're stupid." Since I had the support of the mob, I leaned into it and started telling him he was stupid. His parents hated him. He'd been held back twice because he was so stupid, etc. Chuck was visibly shaking and about to start crying at this point. He had no power and the whole class was suddenly against him. So I went for the kill. "Don't care, you can beat us up, Chuck. You'll be changing my oil one day." After repeating my dad's line, I realized I faked up. Chuck was about to beat the shit out of me. Thankfully the teacher walked back in the room a few seconds later, saw the commotion about to start, and sent him to the other side of the room. Fast forward about 7 to 8 years. I was in my sophomore year of college and came home for the weekend. Took my car to the Jiffy Lube for an oil change. Everything was normal, but then Chuck walks into the lobby holding my car's air filter. "Sir, this is pretty caked with dirt. Do you want a new one?" I don't think Chuck recognized me, but I realized he was literally the tech changing my oil. Seeing him as beaten down as he was, working in a hot faking oil change shop in early summer made me feel horrible inside. When I was a kid there was a girl at my school who was really weird. She never spoke above a whisper and had a super overprotective mom with these freaky giant long nails who she'd always rat people out to. If you crossed this girl in any way at all, her mom would be outside the fence at lunchtime and wave you over and tear you a new asshole. It got to the point where even her friends were kind of terrified, because if you so much as cheated at hopscotch, or whatever 7-year-old girls were playing at the time, I forget, there was the terrifying mom waiting for you. Eventually she threatened to tell her mom on me for something tiny. I don't even remember what. I avoided her as best I could. Must have been some insignificant interaction, like I took her coat hook or some crap. So I started telling everyone she was evil and to avoid her, and people actually did. This girl ended up with practically no friends except for one other girl. Things kind of evened out, but from then on everybody was even more on eggshells around this girl and most people chose not to interact with her at all for fear of her mom. In hindsight that mom was probably so overbearing that her kid never learned to interact for herself, but I don't think I really changed anything so much as made people realize that yeah, the best way to avoid the mom was to avoid the daughter. Last I heard, the girl was in university and had a reputation for being super quiet, but seemed normal enough. I dated a girl from Vietnam who made it clear that she was in a fake marriage for a green card with a guy and sometimes had to hang out with him to keep him happy and playing along. She was very degrading and treated me horribly almost all of our relationship. I was in a bad point in my life and decided to just take it. I caught her staying over his place one night and realized she had been faking and sleeping with this guy the whole time. I also realized her phone was on airplane mode every single time we hung out. She always hung out one-on-one with one of her friend's boyfriends. I always thought it was weird, but never said anything. My intuition was screaming at me that something was up, but I ignored it. After we broke up, and I got out of my depression, I realized how much of an idiot I was, and how I let this girl take advantage of me financially and emotionally. Months after we broke up, I met an amazing girl who I'm still with today and probably will be forever. Despite this, I was still emotionally scarred from what this girl put me through, and I needed revenge to be at peace. I made her anonymous Facebook account and messaged the friend and said your boyfriend is faking insert X's name. This friend of hers was the one who set her up with the fake marriage, took care of all the paperwork and set her up with the immigration lawyer. Whatever transpired the following months after that, I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that her brother and his girlfriend moved out of the house they were in and left the country. They were all currently in college and had big dreams of making a living in America. Not so much as revenge, though it was a response to something I didn't like, to make me feel better, and I will regret it all my life. My dad had cancer off and on. It came back while I was living with him and his girlfriend and her kids in Massachusetts. 2009 or 2010. Me and her kid, Ethan, 2 years younger than me, did not get along. He was a pathological liar and always told his mom stuff and she would tell my dad and get me in trouble. My dad had never abused me ever, aside from spankings, when we lived in Texas with my mom for which I deserved, and made me not a sheethead. Well, one day Ethan tells his mom I did something which I can't remember, and while in the garage alone, my dad came up to me and grabbed my shirt collar and yanked me. I was almost off the ground. This was the most aggressive physically he'd ever been me, and he was yelling about what I'd done, which I hadn't done. My memory is a little hazy, but I'm pretty sure Ethan owned up to lying after finding out what happened, and the next day my dad apologized via text while I walked to the school bus. I replied saying I hope you go paralyzed. The cancer started out in his testicles and moved into his spine up high over the years up to this point, so this was possible and a thought that could happen. I think he replied saying I love you or something similar, but I could tell he probably cried or it hurt him really bad. I didn't talk to him the rest of the day. Over time things went back to normal and we were chill, and I eventually moved back to Texas with my aunt or mom, and he eventually after that did as well for chemo. The years went by, like 3, and we had been on great terms by now, and I saw him almost every day as I lived with my uncle, his best friend, and life was fairly normal apart from his cancer. Well, he passed away in 2013, and I always remember the thing I texted him and never apologized for, and I get pretty sad about it a lot still, and regret ever saying it. 6 months later, the same year my mom passed, and I was just a depressed kid. This response probably doesn't fit in this question, but I wanted to vent about it, so sorry if this story isn't that great lol. In my second year at uni, we had a housemate that we all liked to pull pranks on. He was insanely tall and liked to act like the alpha male, so we had to bring him down a peg or two. One day he's asleep and my housemate says he's gonna go into his room and throw a cup of water on him. For once I felt bad for him, so I said I wasn't going to partake. 5 minutes later, my housemate runs back into his room giggling and locks the door, to which I say I guarantee you, he's gonna think it was me and mess with my room instead. Lo and behold, 5 minutes later I hear the door to my room open and close, so I walk in there to find an entire bucket of water upturned on my bed. At this point I'm pretty pissed cause I had nothing to do with the initial prank. So I go downstairs to the kitchen, find a huge dish bucket full of old dirty plates and cutlery, swimming in chunks of mold, where the plates had been sat festering in it for at least a month, carried it to his room, and threw it over his head, covering him not only in moldy water, but also some cutlery that I had failed to remove. As a result, I accidentally broke one of his PS4 controllers. He had to go take a long shower to wash the residue off himself, and the room smelled so bad that he had to sleep in the lounge for the next 2 weeks. Okay, so this one is probably going to be buried under a ton of dislikes, because my pettiness almost got someone killed. Anyways, here it goes. Some 12 years or so ago, I was a complete loner in class, minding my own business, and doing well with almost all subjects, not really caring about anyone else, and spending pretty much all of my time alone. A new year rolls around, and the classes get hard, like really faking hard, because the dean changes and reforms everything. At this point I'm still doing my own thing, doing great and pretty much acing everything that came my way. Here a cute chick approaches me and begins asking me for help with classes and whatnot, and I oblige and help her raise her marks for most of everything. Around a month later she has separated from her little group of friends. I hadn't realized this yet, being as dense as a neutron star with zero social skills. A day goes by, and people in class begin to approach me and talk to me about how that chick is just making use of me, and that I should confront her and make her stay away from me. After the 4th or 5th person tells me that, I'm convinced this bitch is taking me for a tool. How dumb I was. After the break I confront her, I call her names and other hard stuff. She leaves crying and doesn't come to class anymore. A week later police comes around to give us a talk about depression and bullying. Turns out that girl tried to hang herself and her mother made her change schools. Apparently, I was being bullied and given the ice treatment by the whole class, but hadn't realized up to that point, and the girl tried to be a good person to me, which in turn made her lose her friends and be bullied as well, and when I pushed her away I broke the camel's back. This kid, who was one of my good friends since preschool, decided that I was better for picking on than being friends with. When we got to high school, he would say all sorts of vile shit to try to get a reaction out of me, especially in front of people that he thought were cool kids. He'd sneakily draw swastikas and racist shit in my notebooks, and then one day, when I went to go to flip the page for a fresh sheet of notebook paper, bam, lab partners or teachers see and give me the weird looks. At some point he said some terrible shit about my mom, and another friend had to physically restrain me from killing him in history class. I calmed down and realized I was letting things get out of hand, and if I wasn't careful I was going to get myself in trouble. I needed a more nuanced and subversive approach to my problem. Needless to say, this kid was not doing well in school. He wasn't a total idiot, but he was too busy smoking weed and being an asshole to get his schoolwork done on time. Anyway, he's failing a few classes and decides to make a concerted effort to pass. His hardest class is chemistry, which I happen to be in with him. I see my chance. I offer to help this repugnant son of a beach study and take notes in chemistry for a big important upcoming project. In his eyes I'm like a pathetic beta dog in his pack, desperate for the approval of my leader. Despite all the emotional torment he's put me through, he doesn't think twice about taking help from someone with seething, fiery hatred coursing through his veins, being driven on by the thought of sweet revenge and the eventual subjugation of his enemy. We fill his notebook up. I essentially do his project for him, encouraging him, feeding his ego, assuring him he's gonna pass, and maybe even with a fairly good grade. And then the day before the project is due, I steal that loathsome bastard's notebook complete with his entire project inside and ceremonially burn it in my garbage can in the alley behind my house while pumping Led Zeppelin's version of How Many More Times on my uncle's hand-me-down vinyl player as loud as my shitty speakers would go. Rarely in my life have I felt so much pleasure as I did watching him stammering to the chemistry teacher that he swears he had his notebook with his project yesterday, and watching the teacher basing his judgment what a terrible and careless student this kid has been all year, basically tell him he thought he was full of shit and that if he didn't have the project he failed. He did fail, and then not long after he dropped out, and, subsequently, his life went down the proverbial tubes. Most importantly though, this is probably a bad submission for this post, because it's a very good amount of time later, and I'm still not sorry, haha. One time a kid punched me in the face at my first 8th grade dance because I said hello to his girlfriend. Then a few months later he tried to fight me out front of school to show off to his other druggy loser friends. Ended up shoving me into the side of a truck, which caused me to fall onto the side view mirror and snap it off. I never once talked to this kid and barely knew his name, but he humiliated the shit out of me twice now. Fast forward a few years, we are all at a house party. He comes up to me out of nowhere and asks me for a cigarette. I think, is this faking guy really asking me for anything? So I told him no problem, but I had to run to my car to grab them. Be right back. I walked outside to the side of the house, stuck the filter tip of the cigarette on my butthole, came back in, and watched him smoke the whole thing. About an hour later he's throwing up all over this stupid muscle-headed preppy kid's bathroom, Macklemore or something like that, and I thought it was my fault he was throwing up so bad. So I felt honestly just a very small amount of bad, only to find out that he drank the water out of a goldfish bowl after being dared by his ex-junkie girlfriend in a bid to do whatever she said and win her back. At that point, I thought about offering her a cigarette as well, but I think that couple has suffered enough. Nowadays they have no teeth, still live at home, unemployed, in a toxic I'll kill myself for you kind of relationship. About 8 years ago now, I had a fiancée who had moved from Wales to Scotland to be with me. She wasn't very happy at first, but I thought it was just nerves about being away from home, first time living with a partner, etc. Well, she goes back to Wales about once a month, staying for a weekend at a time. I trust her, nothing suspicious about that. Cut to a few months later. We've been living together for about 6 months, few teething problems, couple of arguments here and there, but on the whole I thought we were very happy together. Well, one night we go out and get blazing drunk, as first year uni students are wont to do. Come back to the flat, she passes out. I'm eating my takeaway when my phone buzzes. I check the text and see some random guy saying, "Babe, did you get home alright? Have you told him yet?" Haha. Thinks drunk me, some asshole, has texted the wrong number. And then I notice the case on the phone. I never had a pink case. Fiancé did though. It took a few minutes for the realization to penetrate my drunken stupor, but when it did, hoo boy. I read through all the messages. She'd been sleeping with a mutual friend of ours back in Wales every time she went down there. Full-blown affair, and that night, she was supposed to tell me everything and end things with me so she could move back to Wales and be with him. Have you ever been so angry a cold haze descends on you? I've heard of the red mist, but those texts took me to another, altogether more terrifying level of anger. I considered my options and decided that texting him was the best option going forward. Which would have been bad enough, except except this mutual friend of ours had recently been undergoing treatment for cancer. And in the cold fury that possessed me, I knew exactly what I had to say. I can't remember the exact body of the texts now, but it essentially boiled down to "You're a scumbag. You used your condition to emotionally blackmail her into being with you, and if anyone deserves to have cancer, it's you." Needless to say, the next morning, those texts triggered what is perhaps the most volatile breakup I have ever endured. Full-on screaming matches, her alternating between calling me despicable for what I said and apologizing profusely for betraying me. It was a strange time. The other guy took it real hard. He spiraled into a depression, became real controlling of her. She moved back to Wales and moved straight in with him. I heard from other mutual friends that their relationship was really strained by the whole thing because he couldn't shake the thought that what I'd said in a drunken rage was, even in some way, true. Anyway, he survived, and they have 3 kids together, and they seem happy. But goddamn, for a while there, I genuinely thought I was gonna be the deciding factor in a cancer patient's suicide. Using a throwaway, because I know they use Reddit, and I'm still in touch with a few of them, and they never actually found out what I did. So, several years ago, when I was in university, I lived in a shared house with 6 other girls. The kitchen was a shared space and we all had little colored stickers to mark our stuff with, so that we wouldn't use each other's things by mistake. I always made sure to have fresh fruit, cheese and other things in my section, and spent a little extra for those luxuries. I had hoped that everyone would respect each other's things, but without fail, all of my stuff would slowly disappear without me eating/using it. At first I figured, whatever, it's just a bit of cheese, I'll let it go, but it got to the point where my stuff would be gone by the end of the week after just buying it. I did talk to all of them and asked politely to not eat my stuff without asking, unless they wanted to go half/half on the cost. It didn't stop, so I decided that if they were going to eat my stuff and not care, then I'd get payback in my own way. It started out pretty vanilla, the usual licking stuff/dropping it in the garbage, and when that didn't do it for me, I started getting creative. I did some faked up stuff, but the worst of it was putting a bunch of dried and dead bugs into a chip dip and mixing it in, and the one I feel the most guilty about was having my boyfriend at the time just off into my bottle of ranch. Sure enough, within 4 to 5 days the bottle was nearly gone. They never found out about any of it. I felt justified in my actions at the time, but when I look back it was definitely wrong, and I could have gotten someone sick. Definitely not something I'm proud of, and would handle my frustration differently if I could go back and do things over. Oh man, I just remembered this. I have another one. When I was again in public school, I think grade 7 or 8, my mom's friend had a kid who was going to start going to my school. Somehow I got tasked with babysitting this kid in the mornings before taking him over to the school. I forget how much younger he was than me, was probably in grade 5 to 6 or something. Anyways, it started out fine. The kid was a little sheet, but we would mostly just play video games before going to school. Except one day he was in the backyard playing basketball. I came out, told him it was time to go to school. He just straight up told me he wasn't going today and he was going to stay here and play video games. I was like, "Oh no, that's not happening. I will get in trouble if I don't bring you to school." He starts arguing with me and then things escalate. Eventually he grabs one of those knuckle dog bones that we had for our husky, whips it at me. It smashes me in the face and I have a big gash on my face and bleeding like crazy. All I remember is being so mad at this kid I chased after him, grabbed him, and literally WWE power bombed him down onto the grass before going back into the house to clean up my face. I came back out after this happened and he was still laying on the ground saying he couldn't breathe. I basically just completely knocked the wind out of him when I Batista bombed this kid into the ground. I felt pretty terrible about it since I have had the wind knocked out of me and I know how much it sucked, but I also knew how much my face hurt by receiving a knuckle bone straight to the head. I didn't do any more babysitting after that. When I was young, there was always, for years, a hole in the back wall of our garage where bees were always flying in and out. I'd been stung several times over the years and I guess I got fed up with it. One day I decided it was a good idea to start throwing rocks at the hole, purely from anger at the bees. Well, as you can guess, the bees weren't too happy about my activity and decided to put an end to it and came after me. An hour later I was in the air in anaphylactic shock from the stings. I'm now allergic to bee venom. To set the stage a bit more, our garage wasn't attached to the house and was no longer used for cars. My dad had converted it to a lounge, complete with rotating mirrored multi-level liquor shelf / bar, pool table, shuffleboard table, couches, fully carpeted, nice sound system, nice pine paneling, full on 70s. Yes, this was in the 70s. Look. Anyway, after coming home from the hospital 2 days later, I got it in my head that I wanted revenge on the bees. WCGW? This was towards the end of summer / early fall, and we had a 80+ foot eucalyptus tree that grew next to the garage near the hole, and as was typical for the time of year, the ground was covered with eucalyptus leaves. I apparently decided it would be a good idea to pile leaves against the garage wall and smoke them out. It took me several hours to gather up the leaves, but eventually I got the pile up to the hole, which was about 5 feet from the ground, and started throwing lit matches at it. The resulting fire not only could be seen for miles as it engulfed the 80+ foot tree, but the garage was decimated. The external siding of the rear wall was nearly completely ashed, and the roof was pretty messed up as well, but the interior was completely trashed by smoke damage, and then by the firefighting efforts. Hundreds of bottles of booze, pool table, shuffleboard, couches, carpet, paneling, everything. And worse than just normal smoke, this was burnt honey. The smell lingered for years. When the firefighters ripped open the wall to ensure no embers were still burning, they found the remnants of the hive. It was floor to ceiling, 7 studs wide, thousands of dead bees. The overall damage wasn't covered by my parents' insurance because the fire was intentionally set. Needless to say, I didn't see too much daylight after that for quite some time. I had a roommate in college who started dating this girl and consequently had her move in. He never consulted any of the rest of us about it. If he had, we might have been cool with it, or at least come up with some compromise. Our dorms were apartment style, and this girl only lived on the floor beneath us. We didn't even understand why she needed to move in when she was only 20 seconds away. Anyways, she was just always in the way, using shit and eating shit that wasn't hers. My roommate and her would be super loud all the time, not just faking, but just talking loudly and being obnoxious, no matter what they were doing. And worst of all, she was like a faking wiki, and after they took showers together, the drain would be clogged, and there would be 2 inches of gross wiki sech water at the bottom of the tub. I fortunately never had to deal with that, because I was always up before them, but my roommate and BFF was always pissed about it. Finally, we tried bringing it up with our roommate, but he got pissed and super defensive about it. He just wouldn't talk to us. The next day I left a note on his door saying I had emailed the head of housing about the issue, and we were going to have a meeting to discuss it. This was total bullshit and a trap. I never emailed anybody. I knew that my roommate would send his own email to the head of housing to try and defend himself. Instead, all he ended up doing was ratting himself out to the head of housing, whom was very confused. The next day my best friend and I come back from the dining hall and the head of housing is there, and my roommate and his girlfriend are slowly and painstakingly having to carry all of her shit back from his room down to her room. We sat there watching TV, while also enjoying the entertainment from what I had wrought, but I did feel kind of bad about it, because they both looked pretty bummed out, and it took them a while, and a lot of trips up and down the stairs to finish. No more dirty Wookie sech water in the shower though, so I didn't feel that bad. Caused a kid in middle school to go to the hospital. He was a bully type kid named Tommy. He didn't seem to want any friends, always picked on everyone, and generally just seemed to hate everyone. During recess, about half the class was playing throw the ball back and forth. He made it his mission to intercept the ball and then kick/throw it away from everyone, sometimes on the roof. On one throw, the football bounced off his head during a missed intercept and I went over to get the ball and said, "Haha, you didn't get it." Well, Tommy launched into an uppercut and caught me right in the nose. The recess bell rang and he ran inside. Immediately following recess we had art class together, where I would get my revenge on Tommy. This week in art we were working on clay sculptures. I started creating a sculpture of a tower with a staircase that swirled around the base all the way up to the top. The thing is, I put one of those 3-inch steel T-pins inside the base tower, pointing up. Tim was walking by my table, and as planned I said, "Hey Tim, I bet you won't smash my sculpture." He took the bait. With a crooked smile, he raised his fist into the air. That's when time slowed down, and I immediately regretted my trap, realizing that it was probably a bad idea. It was too late. Tim slammed his bald fist down onto the table, smashing the clay sculpture. His face instantly turned ghost white and his eyes were wide open. It was so odd though, that he didn't cry out in pain, but only grabbed his hand and ran. He was out of school for a long time. I don't remember how long, but what I do remember is that when he got back he had a cast on his hand. But he never said anything to anyone about it. Not to me, other kids, or teachers. Nothing happened to me, and I don't know why. Either he felt too stupid to say exactly what happened, or he figured I wouldn't get in trouble. A couple of buddies and I were hanging out at my friend's house after the last day of 8th grade, just swimming and thinking about how we had the whole summer ahead of us. My friend's next door neighbors had these 2 kids that were in 6th grade, really annoying and wild, and always trying to torment my friend somehow. Basically the 2 kids, they were both boys, had filled up a bunch of balloons with water and shaving cream and were chunking them into my friend's yard, getting shaving cream all over the place. That was annoying, but the bad part was that they also jumped the fence and were sticking hand shovels into my friend's yard and tearing up the ground and then running around when we came up to them and taunting us when we told them to stop. So I went up to my friend's room, grabbed his airsoft gun, and walked back down with it behind my back. When they kept taunting us and running around in the yard, I pulled the airsoft shotgun out from behind my back and pointed it at them. Their attitudes changed very quickly when they saw the gun, from cussing at us and running around to pleading and apologizing. It was pretty funny. I unloaded on them until they managed to sprint back to their house, crying. Kind of sucks though, because about 30 minutes later their mom came over to my friend's house to talk to his mom, super flustered, complaining that her kids were shot. As if they were shot with a real gun. I ended up getting in trouble, and she didn't even address that her kids totally ruined my friend's yard. I think I may have told this story on a thread somewhere else, but it fits here too. I can't remember why I was so angry at my sister at the time, but I was around 7 years old, and she was around 9. I remember whatever it was, it went on for a while, because I remember it taking weeks to come up with my plan for revenge. Context: she was always very underweight and unhealthy due to complications when she was born, so she was consistently anxious and uncoordinated and didn't stop wetting the bed until she was 7. My parents were always worried about her and how she was doing. Despite her somewhat frail nature, she was still very mean to me and would often escalate things until I couldn't get her back in any reasonable way. If she hit me, I'd hit her back, and then she'd swing something at me. She once stabbed me in the knee for the TV remote. So I knew I couldn't respond lightly, because she'd just get me back worse, and I couldn't physically do anything terrible, because she was frail and my parents were always watching over her like a hawk. So for weeks, I would wait for her to fall asleep, and then pee on her, and every morning she'd wake up crying thinking she wet the bed. This went on for so long, my parents were considering therapy for her, which was a really big deal. Because therapy is expensive, and we were poor as shit. For weeks, my sister cried about this until one night, she woke up to hear me crying. My mom had me bent over her knee, spanking me with the belt, yelling at me about what I had been doing, and I couldn't even deny it. She had caught me in the act of peeing on my sister in her bed. Though I don't know the aftermath of my revenge or its consequences, I thought I might relay it here. Living in Jacksonville, I had a neighbor I became friendly with. It was cool, shared a little herbage with them and all was good. Until they left their sliding glass door open, and one of my cats got in, and killed their cockroach eel. Having no control over this, I apologized profusely, but they weren't having it and were pissed. I didn't know what else I could do though I even offered to buy them another bird. Fast forward a few days, we were woken up in the middle of the night by awful noises. Turned out one of our cats was just yowling and writhing on the floor. We didn't know what to do, so we rushed to a 24-hour vet. Turns out our cat had been poisoned, and we had to put her down. Got back home, walked out back in our connecting yard, and on the neighbor's back patio was an open can of cat food. We called the cops, but there was no real way to prove it was poisoned without testing, and the neighbors denied everything, and we didn't have the money for testing at the time. So, we did nothing. A few months later, I got a great job in another state, so we moved. But, before we left, that final morning around 4 AM, I got the 4 tubes of superglue I had procured, and proceeded to fill the door locks of their brand new Mustang with 2 tubes of superglue each. No idea of the outcome, but I know there was no way they were getting in their car. Petty maybe, but they poisoned my sweetest gentlest cat, so fuck 'em. When I was about 14, a new kid moved in a couple of streets away. He was always coming up to me and my friends and would forcibly join in our games. He never waited to be invited to play with us, and he never asked if he could join in. In fact, most times he barely spoke to us. But when he did speak, he was always exaggerating and just really irritating. I remember he'd often get told to get out of the way, stop saying with us, nobody wants him there, and just to generally piss off, etc. He never listened and just carried on like we were all best mates. Looking back, the poor kid likely had some mental and social issues, Asperger's autism. Anyway, one day me and a friend were walking past his house. It was on the corner of a street and was on the way to the park. There were other routes to the park, but this was the shortest route. Plus, we knew he got really wound up if we walked past his house. So, why not? On this occasion, he was playing in the garden and started giving out insults and general complaints about us being near his house. Both sides were giving it out, and he was getting worked up and being very verbal. At the back of his house, the driveway cut into the land and the fence was lower, so we walked up the drive and stood at the fence giving him grief. Next thing, he launches into full-on zombie rage mode and starts throwing large stones at us. Somehow I managed to catch one and instinctively throw it back at him. At this point, he turns around screaming for his dad and heads to the door, causing trouble. Then screaming for his psychotic dad was a common tactic for him. He'd play it all innocent, and daddy would go all Hulk smash. So this large stone is now flying through the air at speed, and wallop. It hit him on the back of the head, and he goes down like a sack of spuds. Me and my friend both look at each other and split up, heading to our homes at full speed. Hours later, the dad is pounding on my front door in full-on Hulk smash mode, scaring my parents to death, telling them how I attacked Hulk's poor little innocent baby boy, and that he'd apparently had to go to hospital and have 10 stitches put in the back of his head. To make things worse, I had to go around to baby annoyance and Hulk dad's house to apologize to the little sheet. This is a story of the worst thing I ever did. I suffered a lot of bullying due to being fat and socially adapted to adult situations instead of children. Because of my young interest in science and math, I resolved to figure out how it was that bullies came out on top, and after a few years, I got it. Fear and social force multiplication. I was sent away to summer camps. I was always getting sent away somewhere and held against my will, a recurring theme, and I was always the new kid and always fat, so I was always the butt of the jokes for many years. Well, new summer, new camp, this time it's going to be different. Nope. Same bullshit. Extremely gay invasions of my privacy and the group showers particularly bothersome. To avoid these unwanted intrusions, I started skipping meals to take showers undisturbed. This worked for a while, until another kid caught on and decided he would do it too. This kid comes into the shower, where I'm trying to enjoy some solitude, and starts yapping. Yap about this, and that and me, and blah blah blah. I tell him to shut the fuck up, and he starts making jokes about me. Particularly, he called me smelly while I was taking a shower. This just got under my skin, and I told him for the umpteenth time to shut up, or I would ruin him. He laughed off my threat, and I knew it was time for some serious shit. Up until this point, I was not cool. This was the day I became cool. I called a meeting of all the boys in our year except for Stinker, as we'll call him, and I announced that it was open season on this guy. That meant anything that happened to him, I would step up and take the blame. When the adults showed up and someone had to get in trouble, the only thing containing this group of sadistic animals was the threat of getting in trouble, and since I was willing to get in trouble for anything they did, it really unleashed them. The first night, to show I was serious, I waited until Stinker was asleep, then in sight of all the other boys, I dumped honey on him and his bed. Obviously he didn't sleep very well that night. I slept like a baby, because no one would fuck me with after seeing that. I was a hero to them that day. The next night, more abuse. Talcum powder, saucy chicken wings, shampoo, and those were just the things I saw. Having seen that I was serious, the boys really let loose on Stinker. His stuff was defaced or misplaced. On one of the later nights he was dragged into the forest. I wasn't there for that one. There's a rotation of pain on this kid, and no one is letting him get any sleep. On day 4 or 5, he comes to me to beg me to make it stop. Obviously out of the question, and sort of out of my hands. I tell the boys, and they get even more vicious. I'm basically king of camp at this point. Things continue to get worse for Stinker, as he is kept from being able to sleep a single wink, and his every waking moment is lived in twitchy fear. They fuck with his food, they fuck with his stuff, they fuck with his schedule. There's nothing out of bounds. They really fuck with him. He lost hope around day 7, and could be seen shambling through camp with sunken eyes. No one ever insulted me again for the rest of my camp career with those boys. They loved me. Also, since I had declared open season and accepted all blame and responsibility, it was actually impossible for me to get in trouble, because it was clear I wasn't even there for the stuff I was accepting guilt for. Even things I did do, I couldn't be held accountable for. I never once got in trouble during this time. On day 8, he was seriously planning to kill himself, and I realized that things had gone a little too far. I called a meeting with the boys and told them we had done enough and it was time to let him sleep. We agreed he had learned his lesson and it wasn't fun anymore. When I went to tell him it was over, he didn't trust me and thought it was just another cruel trick, like so many others, but I reassured him I had put an end to it and he could go to bed. I'm glad I put a stop to it. His fear of me never went away, and there was a point later where I got in trouble for some unrelated bullshit. Different story, and he was called as a sort of witness against me, because they heard a few rumors about what happened. When the admins asked Stinker about the abuse he had suffered at my hands, he replied him, no, you got it all wrong. We are best friends. He'd never do something like that. Haha. You must have heard wrong. Later that day he came to me to make sure I found his testimony acceptable. I did good, right? We are good, right? I regret those days, but I was a trapped animal, and I had no escape. After years of suffering, I was able to make it stop, but only by transferring it to someone else. I learned an important lesson I'll never forget. And I finally got to take my showers undisturbed. My best friend and I had been playing practical jokes on each other for a year when I saw an ad for a small electronic device called an annoyatron. It's a circuit board about the size of a matchbook and has a magnet to hold it in place on a metal surface. It randomly chirps or beeps and drives the victim crazy. So my buddy, Mike, calls me and asks me to come over to his mobile home and help him install a wireless router so he can get on the internet for the first time. He's not a tech person. As we are setting things up he takes his dog out for a minute and I slip the annoyatron into a pocket door track and push it along the metal track so it is out of sight. Unfortunately I don't hear it the rest of the time I'm there. I call a mutual friend and he loves the idea and tells me he will let me know if Mike says anything about the beeping. I'm out of town for 2 weeks and no mention of the beep. So I stop by Mike's place and again he takes the dog out and I rush to the doorway and pull the circuit board out and fiddle with the switches. It immediately buzzes and I slide back in place and go back to sitting on the couch. Mike comes back and as we are talking he grabs the TV remote and hits mute and says, "Did you hear that?" I play it cool and decide I better leave before I start laughing. So I leave and head home. The next day a mutual friend calls and is laughing so hard I can't understand what he is saying. I finally understand the buzzing is driving Mike nuts, so I give him a call. He answers the phone, and before I can say anything he says I have to call you back. It's starting to rain and all my stuff is getting ruined. So I call the mutual friend, and he explains that Mike has been hearing the buzzing going on for 2 days, and he thought he had it tracked down to a dehumidifier in his gun safe. When that didn't end up being the cause of the noise, he ended up taking every device in his home that plugs in the wall, or has a battery in it outside, and laying it on the lawn. So when I had called to check on him all of his electronics were outside, and it had started to rain the next day I called again, and he answered real quick, and says sorry can't talk right now, I have an electrician here, and he is trying to find the short in my wall and hangs up. I call him back, and he explains the electrician has pulled all of the breakers from his panel, and they still hear the noise, so I ask him if the buzzing is really driving him mad, and right then the electrician pulls the unit out of the door track. So he laughs at first and thinks it is funny, but then he tells me his landlord paid for the electrician and I owe him the money for the service call. The next day I call to see if he calmed down yet and ask about the cost of the electrician, and he tells me when he explained the situation to the landlord he thought it was so funny he is not going to charge for the electrician. It took a few weeks, but he finally forgave me. He tried pulling a stupid prank on me a few weeks later, but it failed before he even got to spring the joke. We finally agreed it had gone too far and quit pulling pranks. Our history class teacher in high school really sucked. Sometimes she rambled around reminiscing in the past and not really teaching us anything useful, while other times she would grill people with questions until they got something wrong. Grading was somewhat arbitrary, with 2 girls always getting good grades without doing anything, one guy getting constantly grilled and always receiving bad grades, and another dude whose German wasn't as good as the others constantly getting corrected in a demeaning way. It got so bad that WW had an arms race with history books. Since it was the advanced history course we already had 4 books, but one student had recently transferred from another school which had the perfect book. Perfect for surviving the grilling sessions. Everyone else also got the book to be able to answer her questions as quickly and accurately as the transfer student could, as to not look unprepared in comparison. Fed up with that kind of treatment, we created the as card Ashkard rewarded to the student that became her victim of the day. I created elaborate statistics for who got it when and how bad they got grilled, and we always had a good laugh. Come graduation and the final yearbook, time for revenge. The entire 2 pages for the advanced history course class of 2008 consisted of comedically mocking her bad teaching skills, the chaotic lessons, stupid things people said, and of course the detailed version of my as card statics, honoring the Ukrainian guy and the other dude for their insane collection of as cards. After submitting our page, my phone rings a week later, and it's the student tasked with layouting the book. The principal, which was also our advanced history teacher, wants the as card statics removed. She deemed them hurtful and disrespectful for the people getting the most cards. I'm furious. Who can she not understand that they wanted that statistic because they felt so mistreated? In my anger, I just put a huge black box where the as card article would have been, with a white text rambling about how we are being censored by the school and how authorities censoring the free speech of an advanced history class is spitting in the face of what teaching history in Germany is all about. My class all sign off on the text. The Ukrainian dude even sharpens the wording and we send it back to the layout guy. The next day the phone rings and it's my teacher/principal on the line, in tears, crying. She said how stressful the last year was being announced temporary principal, being 1 year away from retirement, and teaching history being her life. She was devastated by what she read, and didn't want her entire legacy tarnished by what we wrote. I felt incredibly shitty, and broke the news to the rest of the class. We all agreed that, while the course was a nightmare, we weren't shitty enough people to pull through with the whole thing. The article was changed and everyone was fine with the way we changed it. I still have the original and censored version on my computer for old time's sake. As card champions, your hardships will never be forgotten. In school I had this friend, I'm calling him DH for dickhead. So DH and I for the most part were friends, copied homework from each other and shared lunch. About a month before our breaks for our exams, a textbook of mine went missing. I looked everywhere for that book, and 3 weeks before I decided to get a photocopy of the lessons. So I asked DH for his book, but he wasn't in class. So I went through his bag and found the book. I was looking through it and realized his index was torn out, and B, there was tip X on the margins which covered writing, and C, the dumbass had scribbled on my writing to write his name. I took the book and confronted DH. The guy begged and pleaded to me to not tell our teacher because that would probably get him suspended or something. I was seething, but I thought I got my book back and has sorry about it, so no harm done. I told him I wouldn't tell our teacher. Back at home, and I was thinking about the whole situation and realized that the faker was going to let me fail. That enraged me, and so I cooked up a plan. Next day, I took our class topper's social studies notebook and snuck it inside DH's bag before we left for the bus. Few days before the break, during our lunch break, I see our class topper freaking out. So I ask her what's wrong. She says she lost her notebook, and I tell her what happened with me and that it's probably with DH. It was beautiful. She stormed to his bench, took his bag, and went through it before finding her copy, slapped him and called him a bunch of creative names all in front of a full class. This much I counted on happening. What I didn't count on was the disciplinary in charge, patrolling the halls, and seeing the whole thing. He walks in just as the lunch break gets over, calls DH and our class topper. They leave. 15 minutes later I get called to the principal's office. I know why. I take my book and leave. In the principal's office I see our class teacher, the D, principal and vice principal. Did DH take your book? The D asked me. Yes sir, I reply, and show him the book. Apostrophe. He tore out my index page, wrote over my notes, and put tip X on my book so I wouldn't recognize it. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I found it in his bag, and he said he was sorry. I didn't think he'd have taken someone else's notebook too. They told me to leave with the court and return to class. Next day, I find out that DH has been suspended for the rest of the week and would not be able to give his exams. It gets worse. This was a term exam which counts towards the final grade. Because he had to miss it, he ended up repeating the grade. Back when I was young, sometime in early high school, there was this kid, let's call him Brat, who would try to get two boys to fight each other in a boxing match in the upstairs of his parents' spare garage. Just now realizing how wealthy the kid's family was, he would goad the two into being mad at each other by lying to them about mean shit the other one had said about the other, then get them to put on boxing gloves while he and his friends watched. Weird sick amusement over the suffering of other people. I had grown up with Brad, but never ended up very close with him. Still, I was around enough in this small town / school that even I had heard of this boxing thing. One day, Brad invites me over, and he hadn't invited me over in what felt like years. I declined, thinking it was related to this boxing thing and I didn't want to fight anybody nor watch anyone fight, so I told him. He called me stupid and threatened me if I told anyone about it. Of course, he was a buff wrestling jock who we later found out was using steroids, but his lactating nipples are another story, and I was a small sad art kid, so the threat took, and I didn't tell anyone about the boxing matches. Oddly enough, the next week another kid approached me, let's call him Matt. Now, I didn't have a lot of friends. Being a quiet boy who cries at sad moments in high school doesn't make you very popular, but I got along with Matt. Well, strangely Matt is pissed at me without explanation. I put 2 and 2 together and tell him Brad is a liar who is just trying to get us to fight for his amusement. He doesn't believe me, of course, and continues trying to start shit with me in gym class. He shoves me, and I fail one last time to defuse the situation. At this point I'm fed up, tired of dealing with all my family shit, just to come to school and deal with some manipulative assholes, mindless minions, while trying to get good enough grades so I can leave this small town behind permanently and never see these peoples again. Matt shoves me again and I snap. I'm about 6 inches shorter than this guy, so I grab his neck, throw a foot behind him, knock him down, and start kicking him. I kick and kick and kick, while screaming at him until someone pulls me off, and the teacher intervenes. I think eventually Brad got in trouble, but Matt had broken ribs and wasn't in school for a while. I always felt bad, still do, that I got revenge on the wrong person, someone who was just another victim to the school bully. Wow, I almost forgot about this. This is going to make me look like a terrible person, but here goes. We were freshmen in HS in gym class. This girl, we'll call her J, because I don't actually remember her name, obviously had a crush on me, and wouldn't leave me alone. Some days it was fine, I would do something she wouldn't do, like play basketball, or whatever, but some days she'd go running around the track with me, and the guys all hang out, and read/do HW by the bleachers. But gym was the only time I really saw J. One day J had just pushed me too far. She asked me a lot of personal questions, and wanted to know what I was looking for in a girl. So I developed a story, to tell her on the spot. We walked over to the racquetball court, where nobody went for some reason, and began pouring my heart out to her. I told her about this girl I've been dreaming about, how I feel like I see her all the time, between classes, across the cafeteria at lunch, but how I always have very little time to talk to her. I told her how beautiful this girl is, and vaguely described her to the point where I knew Jay thought I was talking about her. I told her how I planned to ask this girl out, but I was too shy, too afraid of rejection. She spoke for the first time during this encounter, asking if there was any way she could help, and maybe the feeling was mutual. As I saw her confidence building, I knew I should end this charade. I said something to the effect of, "Now you wouldn't know her, besides she's not at school today." She pushed me away, and took off crying. One of her friends came running to me asking what happened. I said how should I know? The next few days were weird. Groups of girls who knew Jay would stop and stare as I walked past. The few times I saw Jay she was with a group of her friends who would basically block her out of my view. The few times we locked eyes, she looked terrible. This all happened towards the end of the school year. Out of the last month she maybe attended class 4 or 5 times that I saw. Eventually the year ended, and I asked a mutual friend about Jay. They told me she was really depressed and convinced her parents to move, and ended up going out of the state. That was over 10 years ago, and I haven't heard anything since. The times I've told the story, less so now. I just feel like a total asshole. Had a teammate on my middle school football team that liked to take drinks left in the locker room. This was the summer between 7th and 8th grade, and he was the biggest, strongest player on our team. He was also the best player on our team by a long shot, so our coaches just turned a blind eye to his behavior. After watching 2 of my friends confront him about stealing their drinks, and watching him kick their ass, I decided that a different strategy was in order. So one day, after practice I told my grandmother about the situation, and that I didn't want to have her or my parents get involved, and that I wanted to teach him a lesson. This was the mid-90s when the small Gatorade still came in glass bottles, so she took me to the store and picked up a grape flavor, went home and emptied half of it, and replaced the space with part castor oil and part liquid X-Lax. The next day I left the drink out on a vacant locker when we did the first round of conditioning drills, and he snatched it as soon as we came back. Fast forward 2 hours and we are finishing up the end of conditioning, which is 40-yard wind sprints on the practice field. He was complaining about an upset stomach about halfway into the sprints, and it hit him about 2 laps before the finish. The field was about 200 yards from the field house, and we all laughed while watching him run/sheet himself the entire way back. From that day forward you could leave drinks anywhere, and he would go out of his way to avoid them. I'm a little late, but there was this kid I knew in high school who was just a jerk to everyone. He acted like he was all that when he wasn't, and brought everyone down at every turn. Even over something he wasn't good at, he would tell you he could do it better. He started being really creepy towards me, always interrupting my friends when I was talking to them, and trying to hit on me, all the while being continually demeaning and rude to me. So one day, I had enough. I let him have it. I told him I hate you, and you probably hate yourself, too. He shut up after that. Several years later, at about 11:30 at night, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. "Can I ask you something?" The message read, I said sure, as long as it doesn't take too long, I'm about to go to bed. He says, "When you told me that you hate me, did you mean it?" At the time, I didn't even remember saying such a thing to him. But it affected him so deeply that he remembered it and asked me about it 3 or 4 years after that conversation occurred. I can't remember what I told him after that. I probably said something like I was just angry and I didn't mean it, I'm sorry. But the truth is, those words that had made a change in him, and not for the better, were ones I didn't even remember saying. After that he just said okay, good night. I really worry that I messed him up for good by saying something like that without thinking. I used to get into little prank wars with my friends. One night when I got into bed I discovered that someone placed a big rubbery dildo under the blankets. I immediately knew it was the friend I was living with, as nobody else had access to my room. I decided I'd return the favor. He was going on a trip that weekend, and while his luggage was unguarded, I wrapped the dildo up in some of the clothes. In my mind, he'd discover it in his hotel room, and would be forced to find a way to get rid of it himself. I got a phone call from him that I gladly answered. He was livid. Apparently he was trying to find something in his luggage with his friends in the room, and couldn't figure out what he wrapped up in his shorts. As he held them up to unfurl them, the dildo rolled out. Phones did too and everyone began to take pics/record video as he insisted it wasn't his. So on the phone I laughed it off and told him not to put dildos in my bed if he doesn't want them returned. Only thing was that he was still denying, which was strange because he liked to brag about his pranks. Later that day, I got a message from an ex-roommate asking me if I liked the gift she left me. Apparently she returned when nobody was home to return her key and get a few remaining boxes. It was during that time she got the idea to leave one of her toys in my bed because she thought it'd be funny. Turned out I got the wrong target. I didn't even mean for him to end up being recorded with it. I completely thought that the worst that would happen would be him running out in the middle of the night to dispose of it in a dumpster before being seen. I was a vengeful kid. I moved a lot, so there was a lot of anger there. I have 3 things that still make me feel guilty. The first, I was in 3rd grade, and I was brand new to this rural Texas school. The bus ride was 2.5 hours, so it left us with a lot of free time. One girl took this time to torment not just me, but all of the girls in the bus, including her supporters. She would say things about my paleness, my butt chin, and most hurtful, my stutter. She would mock me and pretend to stutter until I was in near tears. I didn't have any friends there yet. I only made 2. One that tried to steal my shoes, but that's another story. So I had no one to help me or confide in. When I moved to the front of the bus to get away, I met this boy who was just as bad. He would flick my ears and push me and trip me, and as a bus driver was someone in his extended family, she seemed to ignore it. One day I was in the middle of the bus and they teamed up on me. I was in near tears, and he said just say sugar, and I'll leave you alone. Confused, I said it. He then raised hell, yelling that I had said the N-word and the bus driver wouldn't hear my protests. She wrote me up. That was the last straw. I wrote a letter. A vulgar letter, pretty vulgar by even my standards now, thanks to the creative insults from South Park that ripped the back of the bus beach to shreds and called her every name under the book. I then delivered it to her. I told her the boy had given it to me and wanted me to give it to her since he wouldn't be on the bus that night. The next day, the boy and the girl were both absent from the bus. My stomach churned. I asked around. No one knew anything except her supporters who said she had been really upset about the letter. I went home that night and told my mother. I was distraught. I told her about all of the abuse and bullying and that I didn't want to be a part of it and that I was so incredibly sorry I had written such a nasty mean letter. I hadn't told her before because at the time she was in the middle of one of her long drug-worsened bipolar episodes and I didn't want her to be unresponsive to it, which always hurt the worst. She took me to school the next morning though and I told the principal everything. The conversation went much better than I expected. She required 1 day of after-school detention, but she also told me that because I came forward and was willing to apologize, she thought I had learned from it. She told me that if anyone ever bullied me again, to just come straight to her. She called the other 2 involved in, and they never bothered me again. This is pretty long now. The other two things are revenge for a guy breaking my jaw with a baseball. I got him back twofold. If anyone wants to hear it, I'll post it. I just think the story is cuter. An ex-girlfriend of mine was unhappy about the breakup and decided that a good revenge would be to call pizza delivery services and cabs to my home in the dozens, all at the same time. When the doorbell rang and I looked outside, it looked like a union meeting or a protest of the pizza delivery and cab industry. All of the guys were already discussing what was going on. There were cars parked all over the driveway and on both sides of the street. I didn't count them, but it sure looked like 2 to 3 dozen. She must have called every available company in the city. So the designated spokesperson who rang my doorbell asked straightforward if I'm nuts or if this is a bad joke. All these angry faces staring at me and waiting for an explanation about what was going on. Some of them already calling their boss and talking about suing me. We stared at each other for a couple of seconds with awkward silence, and then I started to explain that I did not call any of them. Then the spokesperson asked me if I had any idea whom had called them. Then it made click and I remembered my ex-girlfriend who was pretty mad at me for breaking up with her. It told them briefly about the breakup which happened a couple of days before, and that this would be the only person I could imagine which could have a beef with me and also knew where I lived. So they asked if I had her address, which I gave them without thinking about it twice. These guys wanted money for the cab fare, for the pizzas, and were talking about suing me, so I just reacted. I never thought too much about that incident other than to tell a funny story about breakups gone wrong. Until I heard a couple of years later, from a common friend, that all of the drivers went directly to her address to complain. They ended up suing her, which led to a conviction for fraud, and ended up with a huge legal bill for her, and a conviction which then afterwards got her fired from her job. That was the point where I started to feel really bad about my decision to tell them her home address without thinking about the consequences. After all, I was the one who broke up with her, so she had a valid point with being mad at me. The way she decided to get back at me was not the foxiest, but I have to admit she was not the brightest candle in the chandelier, which was the main reason I broke up with her in the first place. When I was in college, 2006, I was in a long-distance relationship with my high school boyfriend. Let's call him Bob. We had a pretty dysfunctional relationship. One day while I'm studying for finals, I get a message from his roommate who is telling me that Bob is cheating on me with some girl. He wasn't doing it out of kindness. He was mad at Bob for something and used it as revenge. I initially don't believe it, but the girl, let's call her Betty, gets in touch with me and shows me some stuff he left at her house. Bob of course denies the whole thing and drives 2 hours to my dorm. It was a whole dramatic mess. Anyway, it turns out Bob was dating this girl and moved in with her. She had no idea about me. He was using her more than anything, which is worse. Stupid me wants to work it out, so we continue a long distance relationship. Betty ended up moving to the city where I was attending college shortly after. We ended up meeting and hanging out and really hit it off. Bob is confused, but he lives 2 hours away in our hometown and doesn't have much of a say because he's the cheating asshole. After a few weeks of hanging out, we finally sleep together and I confirm my suspicion that I'm a bisexual woman. I end up basically dating her and Bob at the same time. Bob ends up finding out. Drama drama drama. I sleep with Betty on and off for a few years between boyfriends and distance. I didn't do it out of revenge. I actually did fall in love with Betty, so I guess this doesn't quite apply to the question. Bob and I aren't together anymore, but Betty did come to my wedding last fall. Was in 4th grade. We had a class party right before spring break, and I got this little ragdoll bunny at one of the arts and crafts stations at the party and immediately fell in love with it, as children are wont to do. That afternoon, I rode the bus home, as I normally did. I live in Minnesota, and it was March, so there was slush everywhere. My bus stop was at the end of the street, and I had to walk down to my house with this 3rd grade kid Evan who lived maybe 5 houses down from me, and was a total brat. But on this particular day I barely even noticed him, because I had a little Mad Libs pad that I was filling in. The bunny toy was tucked under my arm, so I could hold it and write stuff down into the pad at the same time. I was completely absorbed in Mad Libs, So when Evan grabbed my bunny from under my arm I didn't notice for a couple seconds. When I did, he was dangling the bunny above a particularly muddy puddle. I screamed and told him to give it back. He didn't because he was an asshole. Instead he dropped it into the puddle and stomped on it, which to me was the ultimate insult. At the time I was a skinny, short, and introverted kid, and Evan was pretty big for his age, so even though I was older he managed to keep the bunny out of my reach. I knew I'd never manage to overpower him physically, so instead I stabbed him with my sharp little Mad Libs pencil. Honestly, in retrospect I barely even scratched him. I don't think it even broke the skin. But he was so pissed about it that he dropped the bunny and bolted off crying to my house so he could ring my doorbell and tattle to my mom. My mom wasn't all that great of a parent during that time. She was a stay-at-home mom with a temper, and I was an ADHD mess who forgot literally everything. So this threat was scary enough to me that I ran after him, yelling apologies, willing to do anything to keep him from telling my mom. Luckily Evan's mom saw him running down the street past his house, with me, crying, in pursuit, and opened the door to ask him what the hell was going on. My mom did get told what happened, and it didn't go as bad as I thought it would, but man, for a good 10 seconds I was full of deep regret. In hindsight, he deserved it. Ex cheated on me, so I blocked the gas card I was fronting for her, since she had credit issues, and waited. She calls me, frantic, wanting to know why she can't gas up her car. I tell her I'll call the gas company and find out. I wait 10 minutes, satanically giggling to myself, and then call her again. I lie to her and say the gas company wants her to pay up her bills since they've been on the card for a long time. But that after those are paid, they'll enable the card again. So she calls her just a friend and has him give her a ride home. Then she pays the outstanding fees on the card. And this is important to her because without her car, she can't get to work. And she has no money because she's a stupid bitch. So, few days later, and she's panicking seriously hard because her employer started giving her less hours because she's been late more than once. I call the gas company and get confirmation that they've received the money. Then I tell them to cancel the card. I then go over to her the same evening and tell her that she's a dumb bitch for having cheated, and I thank her for paying her bills. She incredulously asks me, wait, does that mean the gas card thing was a lie? I just laugh sinisterly and walk out of her apartment. So, aftermath was that she became seriously unpopular with her employer. She was transferred to another location where she now has to work in a ghetto pretty much. She commutes every single day for 3 hours or so. She's depressed and her economy is even worse than before since she isn't getting enough hours anymore. Somewhere down that line, I thought to myself maybe I shouldn't have done that. Then I remembered she lied to my face and faked several guys behind my back. Nope, Beach deserved it. This is a long post, so I added a TLDR. It may not be that significant to others, but it's something I've never talked about and want to get out. When I was in elementary school, our playground had an old set of monkey bars that was away from the newer jungle gyms. Not many people cared for it because it was just 4 log posts with metal rods. I loved it though and spent many recesses before sitting on top of it with my best friend. One day I was at the monkey bars as usual. A few other kids were there as well. One of them was a girl I considered my friend. She was with another boy who decided it would be funny to push people. People asked them to stop and they would just laugh and do it again. I was mad that my friend was pushing me even when I asked her to stop. I wasn't physically hurt, but my feelings were. Growing up I wasn't usually confrontational with others. Half of me was upset, but the other half just wanted to fit in and thought if that's how they want to play, then I'll do it too. I went up behind the boy and pushed him. He fell but was okay. Instead of laughing, he was angry at me. That's when it changed from trying to fit into getting my revenge. It wasn't fair that they could push others, but didn't like to be pushed themselves. I was going to stick up for myself and show them both what it felt like. Next was the girl. That's where things went horribly wrong. I pushed her, just like I did the boy. She fell a lot harder than I thought she would, but unlike the boy she didn't get up. She cried and cried, but wouldn't get up. What happened next is a blur. Teachers ran over and surrounded her. We were told to stay back. Another teacher took my class to her room. She tried to distract us by reading a story, but that didn't cover up the sounds of the ambulance. I could hear the kids whispering, trying to find out what happened. I felt like everybody was talking about me. I wanted to tell them it was an accident. I mean, for things to happen this way. Instead, I just sat there quietly, full of guilt, wondering what was going to happen next. When I went home that day, my mother asked me how school was. That's the first time I ever lied to her. To this day, I don't know if the school ever called her to let her know what happened. Later that week, we made get well soon cards. It was February, and I had special heart-shaped confetti that I glued onto mine. When someone asked if they could use them too, I told them no. Mine had to be extra special. She has to know that I'm sorry and didn't mean it. What felt like an eternity later, she finally returned to school. Everybody wanted to talk to her to find out what happened. She told them how she broke her neck and spent time in the hospital. When I couldn't avoid her anymore, she told me that I was going to pay for what happened and her parents were going to sue me. So fact, nobody else intervening when she was pushing other kids, sitting in a room wondering if she was going to be okay, me feeling like I had to lie to my mother about school that day, using my favorite heart confetti for her get well card. Kids can be mean and accidents happen. The monkey bars are now long gone, and now me and that girl talk about which kind of apple juice we give our own kids. The incident hasn't been brought up since elementary school, and we have grown up and moved on. She didn't deserve to have her neck broken, and I didn't deserve live in guilt over an accident. TLDR, my friend pushed me, and I broke her neck. I just wanted to play on the faking monkey bars. When I was in college, a girl I knew was just a horrible person all around. She constantly played the victim in every aspect of life. She was trying to switch into my major because she was convinced that psychology was as easy major. Newsflash, no major is easy if you don't put in the work, and psychology isn't an inherently easy major anyway. It's not pre-med, but it's not basket weaving. We were in the same 200 level psychology course, and she needed to pass the class in order to get into the major. All semester she wouldn't take notes or study and then copy my notes, and I was sick of it, especially since she was rude, and meanwhile I was carrying her grade. For our midterm exam she asked to borrow my notes, and I told her no. She went to all of our friends and spun a sob story about how she was lightly struggling, and I refused to help her even a little. I got ostracized over this because she painted me as a heartless bitch who just flat out refused to help her. We had to work together on a final research paper worth half our grade, and she decided to do none of it. So I left her name off the paper. We were encouraged to do this in this class if we could prove to the professor ahead of time that our partners were not contributing. She failed the class and subsequently got kicked out of school. I thought she needed to pass the class just to get into the major. Turns out she was on academic probation and needed to pass in order to stay in school. I don't really feel bad because there's no way she could have hacked it in the higher courses, but I don't know if I should have been the one to cause her to get kicked out. My professor said it was technically his fault since it was his policy, and he doesn't feel bad in the slightest. When I was in second grade I got into a lot of fights, probably because I hated bullies and loved Spider-Man too much and wanted to be a hero. The worst fight was there was this much smaller, but also second grade kid who I vaguely knew. These two girls who were 5th or 6th graders who were known bullies to the students, but the yard aides never caught them and referred to as the Amazon women by anyone bullied by them. I had run afoul of them, but I hit them back hard enough that they decided it wasn't worth it. One day running about during recess, I saw them kicking the little curly-haired guy around, and I had only ever stood up to bullies my own size, but I had decided I had enough. So I ran as fast as I could towards them and drop-kicked the bigger one in the stomach, then stood and kicked her in the face, then tackled and UFC style mounted and punched the other. After recovering, the big one laid into me, and I saw red. That haze of fighting, where you're not 100% sure what you're doing, just that you are fighting. What felt like a haze of 30 minutes, but was really only like 2. We fought and I remember getting my face bruised and shirt torn on the right side, so I was wearing a toga. I don't know if I broke the big one's nose, but it was definitely bleeding out. and the smaller ones had a very red face that I'm pretty sure bruised up a lot. Most of my bruises were on my right side. I got nearly expelled, but the principal knew of my hero habits and that I had never started a fight in school, only finished ones that others started. I felt really bad, but I told the school I had been the one bullied and kept curly hair out of it. I still kind of regret it. Lying to the principal who trusted me. My mom was mad because I shouldn't fight girls according to her. And I'm pretty sure they were expelled or moved schools because I don't remember those girls ever really coming back. I just wanted them to stop hurting people, not go away forever. I'd tell this girl sorry if I could. My wife and I rescued a small, scared puppy from a shelter. The little guy's hair was matted and dirty, so we did a little hunting and found a local groomer who said she specialized in taking care of skittish animals. Fast forward several hours, she keeps putting off us getting him. Finally she says he's ready, but that he was groggy from a Benadryl she gave him to keep him chill. Not a big deal, that's an old trick. An hour goes by, and he's way more than groggy. He won't stand up, he is acting totally out of it, and every time we touch a spot on his leg he yelps. We get a hold of our local vet, and bring our tiny, sweet, drugged dog. We are horrified to discover that his leg is broken. He had some sort of tranquilizer in his system and his esophagus was damaged. In short, the groomer beat, choked and drugged our puppy. My wife and I did a deep dive via social media and discovered this groomer had both personal and professional aliases. She had spent years hurting dogs and her husband would pay the vet bills when the owners would complain. Vet bills are fucking expensive for serious injuries. This groomer was very good at covering her tracks, but my wife makes Columbo look like an autistic hot dog. This beach hurt our puppy. Sure enough, the husband contacted us and tried to pay for our silence. We didn't have much money, but the vet respected what we were about to do, so they cut us a break on the surgery cost. We took the hit in order to exact revenge. We amassed a 2-inch thick folder full of photos, aliases, addresses, stories of past dog abuse on this horrible cunt. A veritable orgy of evidence. Then, we contacted the police, handed it over, and then plastered every social media outlet where this sadistic twat waffle had a presence to warn people. To my knowledge, she is still in jail with court orders prohibiting her ever working with animals again. Wait, this is about revenge I regret. Fact that I still revel in this one. I've got a story about this, not a revenge I exacted, but a revenge I witnessed. There was this nerdy kid in the year below back, when I was about 14. He was skinny, pale, glasses, built up shoes, all the tropes. He was routinely picked on by a guy in my year, pushing, name calling, etc. One day our young nerdy protagonist was walking through the quad, a hard floored lunch area with tables and chairs, etc. For I think the only time in my life I saw him walking along, chatting to a girl, and looking very happy / loved up. Our little sheet bully ran straight up to him, and beach slapped him right across the chops, laughed his ass off, and went and sat on a table with loads of his little sheet friends, who were all predictably rolling up laughing. Our unfortunate nerdy little friend welled up. He froze up on the spot, clearly overwhelmed and embarrassed by what had just transpired. Then, in what should have been a glorious coming of age moment, he decided enough was enough. He sprinted, built up shoes clip-clopping along the quad, snot dripping down his nose, and eyes clearly in tears, and ran straight towards the table of little sheets. He wasn't a fighter, and knew he would have stood no chance of beating his foe in single playground combat, so instead he opted for pushing the bully straight off his perch on the bench/table set. Unfortunately, when the little sheet bag fell, he did so in such a way that the side of his head collided quite hard with the corner of a concrete step. He broke one of the orbital bones in his eye. I didn't see the aftermath, but was told his eye was basically hanging out of his head. Our poor nerdy laddo had a bright future ahead of him, but was taken away from school in handcuffs. He was later expelled, despite protesting on part of our bully, who seemed to have learned a lesson or two. I only heard rumors after that, but apparently he was sentenced for GBH, so would have likely spent some time in a young offenders institute. I was in like 4th or 5th grade, and there was this kid everyone hated. I don't know why exactly, but he was that kid so nerdy and weird even the non-bullies picked on him. I wasn't exactly a bully myself, but I think due to my moderately high charisma, I was always the ringleader when something faked happened. One night, I mobilize all the guys in my grade and tell everyone to meet near this kid's house at midnight Friday night and bring all the eggs in their parents' fridge. We then proceed to egg the ever-living crap out of his house, to the point where it's hard to see anywhere that hasn't been hit. We even went around back and hit every side of the house. We probably had a good 15 dozen eggs. We also egged their car and pet every tree in their yard. So I guess the family was out of town or something, because the mess didn't get cleaned up for the majority of the weekend. One of the kids reported that the neighbor was hosing the house off on Sunday afternoon. Here's where the remorseful part comes in. You ever see what eggs do to paint if they aren't promptly washed? Especially when it sits in the sun for 2 days. I did not really recognize this at the time, but his family is like dirt poor. Their house used to be pretty nice, considering, but after the egging, the paint quickly began peeling and flaking off in huge splatter patterns, and the same happened to the car. Now I didn't feel really bad about this until I was back home a few Christmas ago and ended up walking past the house. Same car in the driveway, same ruined paint job on car and house. I wouldn't have thought that they maybe wouldn't be able to afford to repaint it, but it had been roughly 15 years and they hadn't. I felt so immediately overcome with guilt. I still think about anonymously paying some painters for them. TLDR, egging can be a vicious prank. My little sister was a major pain in the ass when we were younger, and a bully. I was basically a twig growing up, no strength, but this kid, despite being 6 years younger than me, this kid was a monster. She did push-ups for fun, was built like a wrestler, and had an insane temper. Her favorite thing to do was beat me up. She was literally the most aggressive kid I've ever met, and could easily knock me on my ass and get me in a chokehold when she was mad. Obviously, being that I was 6 years older than her, and she was half my height, everyone thought this was absolutely hilarious, so she never got in trouble for it, and it pissed me off. When my sister was about 7, she got a skateboard for her birthday. She had no idea how to ride it, but she liked to pretend she did. One day we were outside with some of my family, and she was standing on the skateboard, just kinda rolling back and forth. She started acting bratty towards me, and without thinking, I pushed the skateboard with my foot to scare her. I severely misjudged how hard I'd pushed it, and she went flying backwards as the skateboard shot forwards. Important thing to note here, my sister has had back issues her entire life. The lower part of her back is extremely sensitive, to the point where getting tapped there can sometimes make her tear up. The pain can be so bad it makes her legs go numb, make it hard for her to move / breathe, etc. It's basically excruciating. And she went down hard, flat on her back, and didn't get up. My mom jumped up to help her, and after a few seconds she started making this shuddery breathing noise. She couldn't move, and she said her legs were numb. Then she started crying. I just stood there looking like a major asshole, ready to face the wrath of my mother. I felt awful, and I had no intention of actually making her fall. She ended up being okay, thank God. At the time I didn't realize how serious it could have been. We found out later that she has a severe spinal deformity. She literally has no tailbone. There's nothing protecting the nerves at the bottom of her spine, or her actual spinal cord, and if she got hit hard enough there she could end up with severe nerve damage or even paralysis. That's without considering she could have cracked her head open on the cement. TLDR, spent my childhood tormented by my pint-sized rage monster sister, got back at her by almost killing her / paralyzing her for life. Several years back I had a work colleague who thought it was funny to poke fun at me in a group setting. He was your typical class clown kinda guy, not very self-aware, and also doesn't know when to quit. He passed himself off as this really nice guy, but he took shots at me whenever he could. I was definitely a target, presumably because I was that guy who reacted instead of laughing along with the group. One day, I replied all in a joke email of his asking both him and the group to cut it out and only use work email for work. I sent the email to his boss and she chided the team instead of just him on proper work email usage. This only seemed to fuel his fire, as the next time I saw him in the halls he went out of his way to yell a joke at me across the hall. Several of his friends giggled like schoolgirls as they walked on by. I didn't find it funny. I emailed him and copied his boss, stating that I was definitely a target of harassment and was really sick of the behavior. I thought that would just scare him off, and that would be that. He ended up being investigated by ours and reprimanded for his behavior. I also believe a record was kept on him. Needless to say, my apology was not accepted, and he basically told me our friendship was over. Look, I didn't really care about that, but I genuinely felt kinda bad about the punishment he got. I just wanted him to stop what he was doing. We are now civil, but basically don't talk unless we are at the same place at the same time accidentally. This is probably gonna get buried, but here we go. In high school I went to a prep school. I was really good friends with my roommate. We'll call him Phil. He was one of those guys who had it all. Popular with everyone, outgoing, smart, and he was a star athlete. Sports were his life. He played football, wrestled, he could do pretty much anything athletic, and be the best. Now even though we were best friends, he certainly had a competitive edge, and had been subtly trying to outdo me in school. I was 16, and got a little jealous at his success. It felt like he had everything in the world over me. Why did he need the grades over me too? Anyway, that summer he was trying to start some sort of secret society for the summer session. He decided the initiation would be to jump into a small river that went through the prep school campus from a high up tree branch. A bunch of people were interested, but only me and him actually committed to the jump. When it was just us at the top, he walked out on the branch. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing, but that jealous part of me impulsively shook the branch as he was about to jump. He fell down and shattered his leg. He learned that he would never be able to compete in sports again. Needless to say, I felt awful. I didn't know what got into me. I spent a lot of time trying to deal with what happened. I tried to confess to Phil, but he didn't believe me. No one ever knew that I shook the branch until about a year later. This other kid in the school, we'll call him Bradley, seemed to take an interest in how Phil broke his leg. I'm not sure if it was in a joking way at first or what, but eventually he held a mock trial and Phil began to realize that I had shaken the branch. He got clearly upset and walked out of the room into a marble stairway. He tripped and fell down it, shattering the same leg. He died in surgery the next day when bone marrow got into his bloodstream. It's almost better I got in so late no one will see this. When I was a kid, my sister was originally misdiagnosed by Dr. H1 and ended up getting correctly diagnosed by Dr. H2, but died from her heart condition during surgery because her heart was so enlarged due to the time that lapsed after the wrong diagnosis. Fast forward about 10 years, and I end up in school with the son of Dr. H1, who faked up, and I hated this kid solely for that reason. I never did anything, but was always thinking about the kind of revenge I could get, because in my mind it was a family thing. Somehow, to my adolescent self, doing something to this kid would be okay, since his dad did something to my dad's kid. More years go by, and he eventually falls in love with this girl I know casually, and they are really serious. They get engaged, and he is away at school, while she and I are both home. I knew he was the only person she had ever been with, so I decided having sex with her would even things out. We had sex twice, both times with no condom. They got married soon after, so I faked the wife of the son of the doctor who killed my sister. Revenge is sweet. I never told anyone. Fast forward another 20 years. I'm sitting in a bar with my father and we are getting a little sentimental, which we don't do, and I decide to tell him the story. I get to the end, and I'm so excited when I say, so I faked the daughter-in-law of the guy who killed Lori. Ha 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 ha. He looks at me in disbelief and said, "You dumb son of a bitch." His dad was the doctor who got the diagnosis right. His dad tried everything he could to save her. Turns out I had my facts wrong. We never spoke of it again. When I was a kid I had a birthday party. I went to our bathroom to take a piss, but it was locked, and it stayed that way for like 10 minutes. I was super pissed cause I couldn't play with my friends. Finally he got out. It turns out it was my father's cow walker, and the reason he took so long cause he pooped. It smelled so bad that I puked. I vowed that day that I will get my revenge. It took me 4 months to get my revenge when I found out his daughter is having a birthday party and I was invited. I carried out my revenge by eating a lot at the party, and while everyone was out in the yard chatting and playing, I got a hold of a large Ziploc, filled it with dirt, hid it in my tummy, ran to the restroom. First I had the most massive poop, filled it with one tissue roll, then dumped the bag of dirt. I then proceeded to flush it, but to my surprise it started to overflow. No matter how many times I flush it, the toilet just keeps on puking the disgusting smelly sludge that I created. When it overflowed to the floor, I made a run for it. It wasn't discovered until like 8 minutes later. While playing with other kids, I heard a loud scream, which got everyone's attention. It turns out the toilet kept on flowing, turning their bathroom into a puddle of sheet. When someone tried to use it, the puddle of sheet flowed out and draped their carpeted floor, and it stinks like sheet. I later found out that that bathroom was their only bathroom, and they had to stay at a motel for 2 days. To this day it makes me cringe thinking about it. It was during one of those day camps your parents drop you off at while they're at work. There was this kid named Corvan who always bullied me. I think I was around 11 to 12 at the time. Corvan for some reason had it out for me, would run up and shove me, call me names, and when I would chase him / take a swing at him, he'd run away. I could never catch him. I told the teachers, but they never did anything about it. Then one day I had enough of Corvan, and I was determined to hit him. I was chasing after him across the asphalt, and noticed he turned right ahead of me. I knew I couldn't outrun him, but if I was fast enough I could cut him off. I turned and started to pound pavement in his direction, and he thought I'd given up, because usually I'll be behind him when I'm chasing him, and didn't notice me coming in from the side. Raised my fist and nailed him in the side of the face as I ran into him. Basically just an out and out afternoon, beat down with me throwing as many punches as I could. I let him go after I got a few hits in, and he ran crying to the teachers. My mom was called and picked me up, and while I got lectured, she didn't punish me for beating him up. I only started to feel bad when I was brought back to the camp and told I technically wasn't supposed to be there because of what happened. Corvan never spoke to me again, and at one point was pulled out the camp. And the next school year he never returned. But before he was pulled out, other kids had started to pick on him too, and say how he got beat by a girl. I do feel bad about how things turned out, but it also annoys me that, after telling on him multiple times, the teachers never did anything to fix the situation. I was frequently bullied through high school, ironically by a group of kids I considered to be my best friends, when all I was their rag doll. They'd verbally and mentally harass me, fat shame me in front of the entire batch, and at times it even got physical. I'm generally a calm guy, and laughed it off with them despite the humiliation, but one day they crossed their limits. 2 of them were holding my arms from behind, while another 2 held my leg, this suspending me, while a 5th guy, kind of the ringleader, the dude everyone in our group always wanted to sit next to, held a compass, the kind from a geometry box, and threatened to poke me with it. It was all fun and games, and I knew they meant no real physical harm, but just the scene of pure humiliation, having no control on the situation, and being helpless in front of the class, snapped something in me. I swung one of my arms as hard as I could, and broke it free, and smacked the guy holding me left leg in the face, hard enough for him to later start crying. Shocked, the others let me go, and I used the window to grab the compass from the ringleader. I turned and stabbed one of the dude who previously held me leg in the stomach. Please keep in mind that the pointy edge about 1/4 centimeter long or lesser, so this did no fatal harm. The others fled to their chairs and I followed the ringleader back to his. The last look on his face before I stabbed him hard in the leg with the compass was comparable to that of a whimpering dog. I left the compass lodged in his thigh as I turned my back on him. To be honest, have no regrets till date. When I was 6 I was one of the shortest girls in class, so I'm usually targeted by bullies by taking an object from me and dangling it over my head, knowing I couldn't reach it. Then at 7 I couldn't take it anymore, that I swore that the next idiot who makes fun of me will regret it. 1st grade, lunch break. My mom has the habit of adding fruits to our lunch boxes, and that day I had a banana. One of the usual bullies saw and snatched it from my hand as I was about to peel it, while making monkey noises at me. Soon, the other kids joining in making fun of me. I just looked at that brat straight in the eyes and smiled as I punched myself in the face. I screamed and they were startled. I did it again, and a teacher ran towards me. Take note that, because of my height and appearance, I look so innocent that when the teacher asked me why I punched myself, I said that the bully said so, otherwise he won't return my food. The other kids had scattered at that point. The bully was taken to the counselor's office, and I was carried to the clinic with my remaining lunch. Nurse said I got a few bruises and lucky that I didn't hit my eye/nose. Kid got suspended because he was too shocked by my actions that he believed that he did told me to hurt myself. As for the other kids who were there, they were more or less did the same. I was avoided for a while before the bullying started again, but it was less intense than before. I didn't regret then what I did or realized how messed up I was at that age. That bully came back all nicer after his suspension though. From what I've heard, he's graduating this month in journalism at the top of his batch. This happened quite a few years ago, but still is a great story. I used to work for a private security company at a retirement home complex. When I left the service, I was going to school during the day and working full time at night, so I had plenty of time for homework and boredom-fueled BS with the other guards. This one particular guard was a retired gentleman who was just passing the time before going to meet Jesus. He also liked to sneak out to the front gatehouse in the wee hours of the morning and scare the ever-loving crap out of me while I was half asleep or actually doing homework. This went on for a while, with him randomly pounding on the glass door behind me and me thinking of the best way to get him back using non-lethal methods. This guy had a Beta panel van as his daily driver, the free candy painted on the side type. He would amble out to it every morning before the end of his shift and warm it up for a few minutes, because northern winters suck. So I decided that it would be a great idea to let myself in and hunker down behind the driver's seat and give him the scare I thought he deserved. Just as planned, he walked up to the van and got in at the end of the shift. He adjusted himself and leaned over to start the van when I struck. Quickly, I stood up and grabbed his shoulder shouting name redacted and shaking him like he owed me money. He couldn't get out of the van fast enough. Poor guy whacked his head on the A-pillar and stood outside the door trembling and in obvious shock. But that wasn't the worst of it. The look of fright on his face quickly gave way to surprise, then anger as his hands went to his pants zipper. Guy had urinated. Not just a little squirt, but the whole bladder. It was everywhere, and because of the cold, steaming like a tea kettle. He didn't say a word as I exited the van. He only got back in and drove away. I never saw him again. My manager showed up that night for my next shift, and we had a heart-to-heart about never doing that sort of thing again. He was reassigned to a more low-key location, and that was that. Overkill? You bet. Met this guy, and we got close very fast. We were both 4 months post from horrible breakups. He kept wanting to move fast, but because of my breakup, I wanted to move slow. Finally, I thought it was time to make things official, since we had been seeing each other for 2 months. I opened up more to him about my past and how I slept around after my breakup. However, I did not sleep with anyone while unofficially being with him. Even if I had, we weren't even dating. Well, turns out he didn't like that and slut-shamed me for being into hookups. He broke things off with me because of it. I really hate being slut-shamed, so I said I may be into hookups, but at least I'm not a cheater. Once you're a cheater, nothing can change that, and it'll always be a part of you. When opened up to me about his past 6-year relationship, he mentioned that he had cheated on and lost his virginity to a random girl while he was with his girlfriend at the time. They stayed together and cheated on each other on and off for 6 years until they broke up. I knew how much calling him a cheater would hurt. After that, he blocked me on everything, even though he said no matter what, we'd still be friends. He has read it, so Kevin, if you're reading this, fuck you. This is my story. Went far but didn't exactly feel bad after. It was 7th grade, and I was a tiny little white girl living in the inner city. Being a Marine brat, and being so tiny, by age 10 I was a black belt in karate. However, no one at school knew. My bully was twice my size, a boy, and made my life living hell the entire year. My mom went to the school repeatedly to get something done, but nothing was ever done. Fast forward to the last few weeks of school. We are in class watching Babe. He's sitting behind me calling me a slut, hoe, etc. I have enough and get up and get into his face and ask him to repeat it, to which he replies, "I called your mom a hoe, must be where you get it from." I slap him and he just sits there in disbelief. I go to turn and he gets this bright idea to put me in a headlock. Big mistake. That's one of the first defenses we learn how to get out of. I get out of the headlock and start beating him so badly I black out. I came to the teacher screaming and him on the floor covered in blood. I walked to the principal's office where they called my mom, and I sat there freaking out because I'm like, shit, I'm in so much trouble. Nope. She walked in and gave me a high five and told them if they suspended me, she would return with her lawyer because she gave them every opportunity to stop him. He was suspended for the rest of the year. He never messed with another person again in middle school. When my brother and I were in middle school, he had a friend who lived across the street from us who started being really mean to him for no reason all of a sudden, so they stopped being friends. Well, while they were friends, the kid made the mistake of telling my brother his Facebook password. Turns out it was also his password for everything else, including email, which was rather helpful, and eventually my brother wanted to get some revenge for how mean the kid had been. So we hacked his Facebook and started posting a lot of embarrassing things and messaging all the popular girls in their school saying weird stuff. We then also made a fake account and friended him, and through messaging him with the fake account became his friend and got him to tell us all of his deepest secrets, which we would then expose to the world by going into his account and posting about them or messaging them to random people. Eventually he made the connection and blamed our fake account for doing the hacking, and we went along with it and started blackmailing him with that account and calling him from private numbers pretending to be that guy from the fake account. At the same time all this was going on, we were ordering a ton of food to his house on a daily basis and would watch out our window as the delivery people would show up, and his dad would come outside all confused and get visibly more and more frustrated each day. Eventually they started leaving their house every day around the time we would order food. We kept this up for a while and did some other stuff, but then it died down and we thought we'd never hear about it again. Fast forward a couple months and my parents get a call asking for them to take my brother down to the police station. The family had gone to the cops and they had been able to trace it back to my brother, and when he went down there the cop managed to scare the crap out of him, and I got grounded from using the internet or having any fun at all for a good 6 months, and we had to pay for a lot of the food we ordered. TLDR, made a fake FB account, became friends with a kid and learned his deepest secrets, hacked his account and broadcasted those secrets, ordered a ton of food to his house. They went to the cops. My brother got called down to the Popo station. We both got in a ton of trouble. So, when I was about 5 years old, my best friend's birthday was coming up and I wanted to get him something special. My mom had taken me to Toys R Us, RIP, and I saw this really badass tricycle. I was like, wow, that's what I want to get, insert friend's name for his birthday. My mom didn't want to get it. After all, a trike is usually the type of gift that parents get for their own kids, and my mom didn't want to spend that much on a gift for some little kid. Not that it was expensive, but still understandable. Anyways, I decided to buy it with my own money that I had saved up, just some cash for doing chores and helping out elderly neighbors and whatnot. So my mom reluctantly agreed to let me buy my friend the tricycle. Fast forward to the birthday party. My friend had opened all his presents and the tricycle was his favorite. All the kids were outside playing ball and tag and doing party sheet, and my friend was having the time of his life with his new wheels. After a while, I went up to him and asked if I could try it out. His answer was no, and he was very rude about it. He threw a fit and was shouting that it was his bike and blah blah blah. I mean, we were 5, so that was pretty typical behavior for that type of situation, but I wasn't having any of it. I was furious. I had spent my hard-earned money to get my best friend this tricycle, and he treated me like garbage in return. I got upset and started pushing and hitting at him, so he tried riding away from me. He ended up riding out into the street in front of a vehicle and got hit. I don't remember much more about what happened. I don't remember whether or not he lived. I don't think any of the adults realized that I had basically pushed him out there. They just thought he rolled out there himself. I don't even remember the kid's name, but the memory of that incident has stuck with me my whole life. A little late to the party. I posted this a while back, so I apologize if you've already seen it, but it was the first thing I thought of when I read the question. The year was 1980 something, and I was in 5th grade. I was a chubby white nerd. There was an Arab kid from 6th grade who used to bully me with his friends. Mostly just shoving, name calling, and heckling, but there were a few times they got really nasty. Once was when I was feeling sick, and I was in the bathroom at school. By total coincidence, the leader of this group saw me go in. I puked in the toilet and the next thing I knew, he was behind me and pushed my face into my own puke. Another time, they picked up some dog shit on the way home. They picked it up with a paper bag, ran up behind me, and smashed the bag of dog shit on my head. This kind of stuff, mostly just heckling and fear-jeering, happened every day after school. They lived 1 block past me, so no matter what route I took home, they could follow without being inconvenienced. Every day, as I'd break off toward my house at the end of my walk, the leader kid would say, "You know you better not tell anyone, right?" I'd say nothing. And I told no one. After stuff like the puke and dog shit incidents, he'd grab me, get in my face, make some comment about how I was a total piece of garbage, and then he'd say, "If you tell anyone, I will kill you." I never told anyone, because the way he said it made me believe he'd either kill me or beat me to within an inch of my life. My uncle was a trucker. Not actually my uncle, but I called him my uncle. He used to drive cross country and he always took his dog, Brutus. Despite his tough name, Brutus was a tiny Pomeranian. We were at his house, and he was telling us his story about 2 guys who tried to rob him at a truck stop while he was walking his dog. Having been a trucker for 20 plus years, he was used to seedy characters and hokers and drug dealers at truck stops. He was also well aware of wildlife that would come out to scrounge in the dumpsters, and had come face to face with hungry forest creatures who thought his dog was a meal. Whenever he'd go out at night, he'd take his tire thumper. It's basically an 18 to 24 inch hard wooden stick used to test semi-truck tires. Don't ask how it works. I'm not a trucker. Anyway, the 2 guys confront him, and as he goes for his wallet, he grabs the thumper hanging off his belt instead. He whacks one guy in the head and the other runs away. He takes off, and he ended his story by saying that he didn't know how hard he hit the guy. He wonders, to this day, if he actually may have killed the guy, but he said he looked at newspapers and never found anything. But this was the 80s. Once he left town, it would probably be hard to look up something like that. Anyway, as he told his story, all I could think of was, man, I wish I had a tire thumper to take care of that prick who bullies me. I think of his comment about the forest creatures and I ask if he has another tire thumper, because there's a mean dog that barks at me when I walk my own dog, and that thumper sounds like good protection in case the dog ever comes after us. He takes me out to his garage and hands me a tire thumper. I still remember that he had like 20 of them, and they all had logos on them. I guess banks give out free pens with Chase Bank, and truck supply places give out free tire thumpers with Tony's Truck Part Emporium. The one he gave me was from National Truck Parts. The bullying continues. I keep the thumper in the umbrella sleeve on the side of my backpack. I'm too afraid to use it. It's always 3 or 4 against 1. I might whack one, but the others could get me. I bide my time. On occasion, I see him alone after school, so I figure maybe I'll make the one-on-one stand at that point. I don't know. I'm just scared overall. This faking kid is like well beyond twice my size. He was probably a retard who got held back and should have been in high school. I don't really know, but he was by far the biggest kid in school. Anyway, my school is doing a project on liberty, and every class is making models of some kind of monument. Big models. My class was doing the Statue of Liberty out of chicken wire and clay and papier-mâché. The teacher offered extra credit for anyone who stayed after school. I stayed. I'm walking home after school figuring I'm safe since they left over an hour ago. Lo and behold, here comes the bully right behind me. He must have stayed with his class too. He's alone. He's not saying anything. Just walking. I get to what we called the trails. It's a chunk of land where no houses had been built on the block. It was about 6 empty plots on one side and 2 on the other, shaped like an L, so you could cut through the middle instead of going all the way around the block. It was like a sparse forest and kids would come here to ride their bikes on the little trails that weaved through the trees and around the bushes. I would always take this shortcut on my way to school, but never on the way home. They usually weren't there to follow me to school, so I felt safe cutting through the little woods in the morning. This time, I decided to take the shortcut home, and if he followed me, I'd beat his ass. As I got to the trails, he started up with "Hey fatso, and I don't have my boys. You think you can take me?" Taunting bullshit. I got about 20 feet into the woods, and I heard him say, "Hey, if I cut your fat ass up in here, nobody's gonna find you for days." I looked back, and he had a pocket knife. He was waving it at me. I said something like, "Just leave me alone." And he said, "Time to gut a little piggy." He started running at me. I grabbed my tire thumper and swung blindly. I heard a crack and a scream. It was a blood-curdling scream. I don't even know what I hit, but he was on the ground crying like a baby. I lifted the thumper above my head to beat the ever-loving shit out of him, and he screamed for me to stop. My blind rage/fear clicked off. He was begging me to go get help. Being a kid, I said something like, "I don't want to get in trouble or some stupid shit." But I was starting to feel really bad about this. I mean, he was hurt. He was hurt bad. I was just about to take my lumps and run to get help when through his tears, he said, "Go get me help, you fat faking bussy." I thought for a second, rage clicked on, and I brought that thumper down on his thigh as hard as I could. I heard a crack, and that rage clicked off immediately and turned to confusion. Not remorse. Maybe fear? I don't know. He screamed again. The begging continued. He pleaded for me to get help. Now, all of a sudden, he was being very polite. Out of nowhere, I heard someone yelling from the street 20, 30, 40 feet away, "You okay in there? Hello." I dropped down, covered his mouth with my hand, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "If you tell anyone, I will faking kill you with your own knife, after I break both your faking legs." Apparently, I'm a good actor, because his eyes reflected the fact that he totally believed me and completely understood. I took his pocket knife, hunkered down, and ran out of the forest toward my house. He wasn't in school for about a week. I was shooting bricks about getting in trouble, but no one ever came for me or questioned me. Without him, his buddies left me alone on the way home. When he came back, he had an arm in a cast. First hit, the blind one, and his leg in a cast. Second hit. The story he gave everyone was that he was walking through the trails and fell off the makeshift ramp some kids built for their bikes. He never bothered me again. His friends never bothered me either. I kept that thumper with me every day though. Probably stupid to carry around a weapon, but I was maybe 10 or 11 at most. I didn't know any better. I stashed his pocket knife in some insulation under a floor plank in the attic of my grandparents' house that weekend. They sold the house shortly thereafter, and I never had a chance to go back. I wonder if it's still there. In any case, that was the only thing I've ever done that outright hurt another person, and it's probably the only story I haven't told anyone. Not my wife, not my best friends, no one. I still think about this 25 to 30 years later, and I feel horrible about it. I always have, but I justify it because of the bullying. And when I was about to go get him help and bite the bullet for what I'd done, he pushed me again. I just snapped. And, of course, he recovered, so it's not like I left him crippled for life. I've googled him over the years, and while he was arrested for domestic battery and animal abuse in the late 90s, he owns his own business now, and his Facebook page gives the impression that he's turned himself around. He's married to another lady and has a couple kids. His current wife is a big lady, and I have a feeling that if he tried smacking her around, she'd lay his ass out worse than I did. My handwriting used to be bad and unreadable. It has gotten better over time, and way after this happened I got diagnosed with a circumscribed developmental disorder of the fine and graphometer. So, at the time I couldn't do anything about it. It was 6th grade, and I had this horrible teacher who used to pick on me because of my handwriting. She used to take points from me on tests, make fun of me in front of class, etc. Pretty much everyone knew about it. Teachers, people from administration in my entire class, but no one ever did anything. Then one day I was standing with a group of friends in recess when she came to us to talk about something. Don't know what anymore, probably told us off because I was mad at her afterwards. She turned and started to leave. So, my miniature brain thinks it's a good idea to pretend to throw the water bottle I had in my hand at the back of her head. Keep in mind this is just a half-liter water bottle that was less than half full. Problem is my grip was basically non-existent, so the bottle flies straight out of my hand and at her head at moderate force. She immediately breaks down crying and all, while I guide her to the office with a massive crowd of kids staring at me, not uttering a word. We get there, and the principal sends her home and calls my mom. My mom gets there, and the principal explains the situation to her, but also explains that the teacher was a well-known asshole. So, in conclusion, she got what she deserved, and miraculously stayed on sick leave for a week. She never bothered me again. I gained street cred, and was never punished for it. Only bad thing is every time I remember that moment the cringe is pretty much unbearable. Edit. Kind of accidental revenge, but what eves. Not my revenge, but one I witnessed. In my high school there was a very strict social hierarchy that said cheerleaders and football players were off limits for anyone else to date. It was ruthlessly enforced the years I went there, but my senior year it was the worst. There was this guy, I'll call him Tim, who was a bit odd, kinda awkward, but a genuinely nice person. He made the mistake of asking a cheerleader he had a crush on to homecoming. The football players were pissed. The other cheerleaders were pissed. The girl, who was friends with my lab partner in chemical, actually thought he was sweet and wanted to say yes, but couldn't stand up to the peer pressure. A few days later in the lunchroom one of the football players yanked down Tim's pants and underwear as he walked back to his table. There was something like 300 kids per lunch period, and damn near all of them laughed their ass off at the poor guy. I didn't, and I felt partly responsible because he'd gotten up to ask me if I was okay, since I rarely came to the cafeteria. I was only in there to eat a few crackers and drink a Sprite since I wasn't feeling well, and he was concerned because it was so out of character for me. He tried to kill himself a week later, and his parents ended up pulling him out of school. Nothing happened to the football player, of course, even though he was 18 and Tim was only 17. It was just so faked up. My sister pissed me off. It literally wasn't anything significant enough that I still remember, but at the time I was mad and decided to scare her. I recently discovered I could use my school printer, so I was excited to do something with this new power. So I wrote in a Word document a bunch of personal info about my sister, my mum, dad and her siblings, me. Then I signed off with "I will kill you." I put it in an envelope, and when my mum dropped me and my sister home I ran ahead and put it in the post box, then acted surprised when I found it. Looking back, it was so obviously fake, like the font was seriously like 50, as if a child did it. I clearly ran ahead and posted it, but for some reason my mum and sister believed it and were shook enough to call the police. I'm at the verge of tears thinking back to how 12-year-old me felt at this moment. The police said we should bring in the document and the envelope it came in, and all I could think was fingerprints are fine, because we all touched it, but I licked the envelope whole white sheet. Honestly, I don't know if I was actually kind of smart or I just watched too much CSI as a kid, but I hid the envelope so the police couldn't get it and left only the papers. My mum was obviously mad that we lost backquote evidence, but I was like, it's fine, we'll find it. The next day I went to school, got another same brown envelope because the first one was from my school too, and glued it closed. Then ripped it open in a similar way. Then, when I got home I acted like I found it, and my mum brought it to the station. We never got an update, and to this day, almost 10 years later, I haven't told my mum the truth. I know she only believed me because I swore on God it wasn't me, and we don't do that and lie in my family. I still don't, but she had the GD police on the phone. There's no way I was gonna admit it. So yeah, revenge that got so GD out of hand. I still can't believe it looking back. I seriously cold got in so much trouble if I was caught. I dated this guy, and he was a depressed drunk. After college, we moved to California, and then he got laid off from his job and broke his arm. I was so sick of him not helping out, I figured a plan. We had stopped drinking and had planned to continue, but on his birthday I came home with 2 bottles of wine and some fish for him to cook. We drank the wine, decided fuck it with the meal, and we headed to downtown Long Beach. So, I knew I wanted to break it off with this guy, lived with him for 7 years, but I didn't know how. So, we drank, and eventually I wanted to go home, even though it was 11 p.m. It was his birthday and his thing is pinball, so he wanted to go play pinball for a few minutes in the bar next door. I said no and we ended up having a big fight. We walked home in different directions after that, and he got there first and went to bed. I went in after him, but the drunk asshole kept saying that I had to sleep on the couch because it was his birthday and he was mad at me. Eventually, the fight got heated, but not violent, so I did leave his bedroom, but I was pissed. That's when the plan fell into place. While he was sleeping in bed on his birthday, I called the cops and said he had attacked me. It wasn't true, but who would they believe? Cops showed up, woke him up, and took him to jail. In Long Beach/Chormtown, even. They held him for domestic violence, but never charged him. Even though he did nothing, after a while he bailed himself out of jail, spending $5,000, charging really, he was broke, hurt and unemployed, on a bail bond. Best part, he had a party planned, states away the next day, for his birthday. We had bought plane tickets, but he was stuck in jail, for doing nothing, and on his birthday. So, I went to his birthday party and lied, told everyone he had a last minute job. I then collected all of his birthday presents from that party and kept them, then went home and kicked him out of the house. Revenge. Wait, no, that was done to me, not done by me. Playing in an inline hockey game that was getting a bit rough. Our league was recreational, so hitting wasn't really allowed, but in practice it really depended on who you had reffing. This game, the refs were chill/lax on enforcing that particular rule. One young, flashy, skilled, and hot-tempered player on the other team was the cause of most of the bad atmosphere on the rink, playing very physical, and being very mouthy and cheaty whenever something went against his team. Anyway, I came onto the bench after one shift and a girl on our team was in tears, said the guy had slashed her after losing the puck. TBH, I was already gunning for him, because that's just how I play hockey, not enforcer or goon. I'm too little, but standing up for my teammate now. But this made me extra fired up to take him out. As soon as I got the chance on my next shift, I hit him at near full speed as he was turning around from facing the boards. It was brutal. I guess it should have drawn a charging penalty at the very least, even if we were playing full contact. He got up mad as hell, dropped his gloves, started swinging. I just skated backwards taunting him. He ended up being removed from the game, 3-match suspension, all that shit. I ended up feeling really bad for messing with a younger person, when I should have known better. His mother, who was spectating, talked to me after the game, and apologized for him, but that just ended up laying a massive guilt trip on me. In high school, my cousin was addicted to this girl I was about to be dating by spreading rumors that she hadn't standard, so I decided to draw a picture of our obese history/metal shop teacher as a bowling pin that was getting faked by a bunch of racial stereotypes. My friends broke into his shop locker and wrote a bunch of derogatory words on his shop hammer like nigger beater, spacky squisher, so on. In history class, I dropped the paper under his desk just out of foot reach with his name forged in the corner. He sees it fall, and once he sees what's on it complete with his name, he begins this mad clawing action with his foot to reel the paper in before someone sees it, but he's drawing the entire attention of the room doing so, and so the teacher found it and got this sort of look of pure hate on his face before just making my cousin leave. 2 classes later, he's in metals with the same teacher, which I wasn't in myself, but my friends were. They said he pulled out his toolbox from the shop locker and opened it to see the hammer with this complete look of shock, followed by him just running out of class. The instructor found the hammer and went to rip him a new asshole again, but apparently he'd locked himself in a bathroom and was threatening to kill himself with a drill. We were juniors in high school and apparently he'd been dating a 14-year-old that broke up with him that day, so all in all he had a nervous breakdown. On mobile. Forgive my formatting. 5 years ago, I broke up with my girlfriend and we had to end our lease early and move out. It was somewhat civil until she withheld some of my things. I demanded them back, and if not, I threatened to keep some of her belongings too. Total bluff. Her roommates got involved to make me back down, so I panicked and I threatened to have them evicted and a roommate's kid taken away. One of the roommates was a coke dealer. They threatened to kill me, so I backed down and admitted defeat. However, when we split, she was using my new place as storage before it turned sour and forgot she had a lot of childhood mementos there. I was still fired up after having my life threatened, so when I found it while unpacking, I set her stuff on fire. As it was set ablaze, I saw things like Christmas cards from dead relatives, medal/cords from her graduation, Pokemon cards from when she was young, your typical irreplaceable sheet. I took a photo of it and sent it to her. She had a panic attack/seizure after that. The stress from it snowballed into a chain of events. She got fired from her job, she let her grades slip, and dropped out of college, and she got into a car wreck all within 2 weeks. I have to admit that it's one of the worst things I've ever done. With all the things she put me through, I thought I was getting even, but it doesn't equate. I don't regret it, though. A former friend wronged me, and I decided to exact revenge. I felt the need for the revenge to be harsh, because we were pretty close as friends, and felt that the revenge should match the heinousness of his offense. In order to set the scene for my revenge, I must explain one of our mutual hobbies. He and I shared a common enjoyment for working girls. Occasionally, I would finance said adventures for the both of us. This entailed getting a hotel suite with separate bedrooms and 2 providers. My revenge proceeded as follows. Create a web page referring to his wife as Bessie, with accompanying pictures of a cow labeled with said moniker. Create a link on that web page titled "Click here to see Michael engaging in extramarital relations with an escort." Clicking on this link led to a page with an email link saying that one should email with any request to see what I described. I then emailed the object of my revenge with the link to this website. I described to him how I snuck in the room during our last adventure and took several revealing photos of him and the young lady he was getting sweaty with. I had not. I also included in this email the email addresses of numerous people, such as his wife, executives of his employer, board members of his church, etc., and said I had sent the link to them. I had not. I thought that would be the end of it. Some bull busting, a few nonsensical insults traded, and done. But he took me at my word. He decided that the best thing to do would be to confess to his wife before she found out. So that's what he did. And it resulted in him and his wife getting divorced. That wasn't my intent. TLDR got revenge on a former friend by convincing him I had a picture of him with a hooker. I didn't. Although it wasn't my intention, he ended up divorced after confessing to his wife about the hooker. At the end of my 8th grade year we had a teacher who at times was a real C-word. Sometimes she was nice, specifically when she wanted something, or was referring to the Catholic Church. Before we get out the pitchforks, I went to a Catholic school, so this was part of it. Other days she was the worst. Well, anyways, we were instructed to write her letters at the end of the year to her to tell us what we learned and thought of her. Well, me and one of my friends absolutely berated her as she was extra mean to the 2 of us, and we were not the kids who acted up in her class. It was mainly the fact that we didn't agree with her and the Catholic faith. We mentioned that the school was an absolute disgrace of the Catholic religion, that she as a religion teacher was a terrible person, etc. Both of our letters were by far the longest and the only people who had enough balls to say anything to this woman, who calls herself a religious professional teacher. Everyone was far too afraid of the school and what she would do. Well, we get asked to stay, after turns out in all the years that she had been teaching only one other kid had said that she was a beach, and he was a pain in the ass. We on the other hand were quiet, well behaved, and usually at least participated in class, which she now realized was only because we were asking questions about questioning practices. We never were rude about it. You could tell it was all clicking for her. She then began to cry because in the letter we said how everyone in the school felt this way but were far too scared of her and how she would manipulate it to the school. I mean, we really laid the entire picture out for her, and they weren't just mean-spirited letter. No, they were filled with references, quotes, and both us had really completely different letters, but went back to the same points and instances. Despite us not knowing what each other wrote as this was in class, and had no way to conspire. Me and my friend both looked at each other with that OHH we took this too far look. We never apologized, and I still slightly regret it, but man, some people just need to be told these things sometimes. India, especially rural India, still has a persistent caste problem, even though it is constitutionally outlawed. People like to deny it, but it's still very much present in the collective consciousness. Think of it like racism in USA, but more complex, with multiple castes, subcastes, and sub-subcastes involved. I'm from the lowest caste that was, and in cases where the lower caste and lower class intersect, is still forced to clean sewage and clean the streets of animal carcasses and the like. I, personally, or my family, are not as unfortunate because we are moderately middle class and can afford to live in affluent areas in towns/cities. I was a 5th grade kid, and I aced every class up to that point, and even after that, for practically my whole school life. So 10-year-old me couldn't fathom why one of my closest friends who always used to share my lunch suddenly stopped one day and wouldn't even eat with me anymore. In retrospect, I had seen some other kids from the class whisper something in my friend's ear just that day. At least for the next few months, these kids were wary of being around me and seemed to murmur to each other when I'd pass by. I knew they were making fun of me, but I didn't know why. In my own little mind then, one that didn't understand the socio-political dynamics of a system as entrenched in the India psyche as caste, I was not inferior to any of them in any way. In fact, I was superior to them in almost all ways, except perhaps in pay. Over the course of that year, I got to learn about what caste is and how my friend stopped eating with me just because I was born to a certain set of parents. One fine day, I was passing by the mound of construction sand in the playground where the kids used to play during recess, and one of the kids said something along the lines of, "Hey look, it's the extremely bad caste-based slang here, think mudblood from HP." Moreover, this was said by one of the kids I considered my friend. Looking back at it, this was one of the few times in my whole school life that someone was able to get me angry. I'd had months of the ostracization, and I wasn't having literal slang thrown around at me. I went to where the kids were standing and tried to do something I'd seen in a movie, that thing where you make a person keel over with your foot and bash their head into the ground with your hand, and what do you know, I was actually able to do it. Thankfully, it was near the sand mound, so the kid only got his face stuck in and full of sand, but he seemed like he was in bad shape when he got up, and ever since, it's one of those incidents where I think I acted too impulsively. None of those kids called me using slang anymore, though, and thankfully as we grew up, they learned that being casteist, just like being racist, at least openly, is frowned upon. Okay, so, complete honesty, I don't really regret this as much as I should, but some regret is still there, so here we go. When I was around 16, some sheethead neighbor kids started picking on my sister's dog. The dog stayed in the backyard because, despite being incredibly friendly and gentle with people, and super tiny, she would tear through furniture. We had a huge fence, but there was one hole in it just big enough for these asshole kids, all around 10 to 12 to stick their BB gun through, to take pot shots at my sister's dog in the middle of the night. We tried calling the police and talking to their parents and got nowhere. My dad told me he was going to keep talking to the parents, but I was completely done seeing someone hurt this tiny, incredibly sweet little dog, and decided I'd get these kids to stop my own way. So I sat outside near the garage, where I wouldn't be noticeable, and waited with the most threatening thing I owned at the time, which was a crowbar. Sure enough, the kids showed up, got out their gun, and I jumped out, let out some primal scream, "Fuck up my dog and I'll fuck you up," and chased after them. I had zero intention of actually hitting any of them, but I did manage to scare the hell out of them, and chased them about halfway down the alley back to their house. One kid tripped and ate shit, but it was dark, and I figured that he was fine. I just yelled out some final parting threat, told them to leave the dog alone, and went home. Turns out the kid's face got a lot more intimate with the concrete than I'd thought. He just about tore half his freaking face off and looked like hell for about a year after that. Only saw him once after it was healed, and it healed pretty okay. One of the other kids also apparently fell and fractured his arm. The cops were called. I told them the full honest story, and they chalked it up to stupid kid crap. I did learn from my dad after the fact that the parents were really messed up people, though, and half the reason the kids were so awful is because they were getting worse from their parents at home. We are pretty sure that's why they left the neighborhood a few years later, finally got taken by CPS. I still think these kids kind of deserved what they got for shooting at an innocent animal, but nobody deserves abuse like they were getting at home, and that's enough to make me feel kinda bad about it. This one is pretty good. A friend of mine that I knew on Sparks Live, to who we'll refer to as Josh for privacy reasons, was always a dick to everyone that knew him. Me, a couple of my friends, and even kids I didn't know. He would talk shit about everyone and everybody. We'd still be cool, of course. Sometimes we'd even play a bit of Battlefield and Halo together. At that time, I was really into Cast Lumina Z, Minecraft ripoff. That was really cool. I'd actually built an entire fortress that took me months to complete. Anytime I was bored, I'd just play Cast Lumina Z, and sometimes my friends would play it too, since it had multiplayer too. One day Josh decided to play the game too at my fortress. Then this is where he crossed the line with me. He started insulting me and talking shit like he always did. We got into an argument, of course. He muted me and destroyed my fortress. This made him my enemy, and I was determined to exact revenge on him. So one day I found intel that Josh and his girlfriend liked to do sexual/fantasy roleplay in anonymous chat rooms. They both used unique names in the chat that only they could identify themselves as. I watched and I wrote down their names. I gathered up some friends of mine, and we staged the chat room to make it look like Josh's girlfriend was cheating on him with another guy. This worked brilliantly as he was pissed. However, it turns out that she'd actually been cheating on him IRL, unbeknownst to me at the time. He became livid with her, felt he had been betrayed, never found out that the chat was all staged until I told his friends months later. However, I found out that he had serious mental instability issues and that he had been cutting himself again after him and his girlfriend had broken up, and that he attempted suicide and ended up in an asylum. Years later, he did get out and recovered. We've never spoken to each other since. I sold my Sparks and moved on with my life. Do I regret it? Yeah, somewhat. Moral of the story, he faked with my world. I destroyed his real one. A few years ago, me and some friends were in this group chat with a fair amount of people. I'm talking like 30 to 40, all from our school. The group chat was about some party/formal type thing. Anyway, we were kids and immature, so ensues a roasting battle between me and my friends, while the other 35 odd people watched on with the occasional lol or laughter from them. Eventually it started to get a bit much. Funny roasts started to turn into genuine insults, and I seemed to be taking the most of it, and all of my friends ended up turning on me, taking turns. So at this point I started to get a little upset. It turned from roasting to pretty much me being humiliated in front of most of my year from school. Being kids and also having a Snapchat group chat between my friends, some of them would send some pretty questionable stuff. Photos of each other's flaccid penises. In other words, one of my friends in particular sent a photo that I and the rest of my friends had screenshotted due to his foreskin being unusually long, and we all laughed our asses off. We deemed him anteater because his foreskin looked like an anteater's face. Anyway, he's one of the people in this group chat going pretty tough on me in front of the rest of my year. I got pretty fed up with him. I even messaged him privately saying that if he keeps going he's probably going to regret it. He didn't stop, and I sent a photo of him and his penis in full view for the whole of our year group to see in the group chat. Safe to say there were some pretty heavy consequences for me doing that. Funnily enough, the guy and I are still pretty good friends to this day. We got over it and chalked it up as another classic funny moment with the boys. This is more kids being idiots than anything, but there was a bit of revenge in there too. Back when I was in 2nd grade, one of my friends invited me to his birthday party. We played musical chairs, and he cheated by shoving me off a chair after I had already sat down. When I tried to call him out for cheating, all the other kids were on his side, and I ended up sulking for pretty much the rest of the party. Later, after all the other kids had left already, he came up to me and asked me to flip him over my shoulder, which for context was something I would do sometimes when we would play fight in the backyard. Probably wasn't safe to do it there either. I didn't really do it with the intention of getting revenge, but I was still pretty pissed at him. When I did it, his face got smashed right into the floor, and he broke his nose. The next 10 minutes, while I waited for my dad to pick me up, were the most terrifying in my life. I slipped out the front door and pretended like I had already left, listening to all the screams and panic inside. When my dad finally got there, I sprinted to the car and told him to floor it as soon as I was in. My parents had to apologize later, and the two of us weren't really friends after that. It was pretty awkward when the two of us got put in the same group for our field trip to the aquarium literally only days later. Wasn't me, but my coworker. I work at a dealership and our reconditioning, car detailers, crew was two guys who are referred to as Arthur and Manny. Arthur had worked for the dealership for about 3 years and was a decent guy, but was really hard on new hires. Despite not being their manager, he would order them around, insult them, just generally act like a douchebag. It got to the point he would refer to his co-workers as numbers, since so many quit. So along comes Manny. Super nice guy in his mid-30s, really good at his job, would do pretty much anything you asked of him. So Arthur treats him the same way, hard but not completely unprofessionally, until he figures out Manny is going to stick around. Then he really lays into him to the point of threatening him, saying things like, "If you try to buff that scratch, I'll punch you in your faking face." Now right around this same time, Arthur started to have issues with his wife. Super long story I won't get into. And he was also a recovering alcoholic. Hadn't drank in over a year. So after a couple of months of abuse, Manny forms a plan. Every day, Manny would buy a pint of vodka for Arthur. Now because of his personal issues, it only took a little nudge. But he fell off the wagon hard. In the span of maybe a month, Arthur split up with his wife, moved to Florida with an old flame, and quit his job. Needless to say, Manny feels a tiny bit responsible. TLDR, Arthur abuses Manny at work. Manny tricks Arthur into falling off the wagon and blowing up his entire life. Freshman year of high school, I was first string wide receiver for the freshman team. Freshies weren't allowed into the actual league unless they had the best stats for the first year. Then they got drafted to the real team for sophomore year. This kid, I shit you not, made third string kicker, was always talking trash about my catch game. I only dropped one pass the whole season, not counting the 2 interference, and one day I got real sick of him always busting my balls. Kicker was a huge sneakerhead, and he had pre-ordered these new expensive Jordans and had to drive to a Foot Locker in another city to pick them up. He wore them to school, but always brought an extra pair for gym and weightlifting classes. He didn't have a lock for his locker. Most of us didn't, because the school made us buy one directly from them. We couldn't bring and use our own. One day before we all went into the locker room to dress back into our normal clothes after weightlifting, I dumped Gorilla Glue into his sneakers and closed the locker back. I watched him slip the shoes on, and he noticed nothing. After school that day, he didn't show up to practice. Turns out Gorilla Glue really faking holds. He had tried taking his shoes off at some point that day. Another kid from the team told coach about it, and he couldn't get them off. Started freaking out real bad and made the school call an ambulance. At the hospital they had to use surgical scissors to cut the shoes in half, but supposedly they couldn't get the soles and socks off, so they used steam to melt the glue. Kicker's shoes were toast, and to this day he does not know it was me. I kept it a secret until my second year in college. Okay, long-winded reply, and I'm probably going to get downvoted to hell for being a shitty human being, but the man asked a question, so I'll try to answer it honestly. Grew up in a small village, and my mom was the unofficial village bike, as in everyone, and their mums had had a ride, so I naturally got a lot of shit in high school about her whorish ways. There was this guy in the same friendship group I'll call him Jay, who everyone found irritating, but, being shitty 15-year-olds, was tolerated by some members because he had a lot of money and was generous with giving friends handouts. Everyone there didn't like Jay. I don't think anyone ever had anything positive to say about him that didn't involve money, but no one, out of pity or because they were after his open wallet, actually told him to just piss off. Anyway, one day he brings this massive backpack full of alcohol round to a mutual friend's house, and, once again, shitty 15-year-olds, is hailed as king of booze for the rest of the night. This makes Jay's head swell, and at some point he decides that he's tiptoed his way into the group far enough to start ripping on my mom's overactive sex life. At that age, I didn't even like my close friends bringing it up. So I especially didn't like it when Jay, the faking incarnation of pop collar, YOLO swag, started outpouring a torrent of diarrhea to your mom's a slag comments. Told him to fuck off. For the next 10 minutes he did not fuck off, and the longer it went on, the more desperate Jay was to get to me, so the crueler the jokes were becoming. As a last ditch, he mentioned something about buying my mom and my little sister, who was 12 at this point, in a 2-for-1 deal, and I just lost it. I outright told him that no one wanted him there, no one liked him, that some of the guys only bothered to put up with him for his money, and how low is his self-esteem if the only friends he can get are a bunch of people who relentlessly character assassinate him, and he still hands them out a load of money in the hope that they'll eventually like him. Jesus Christ, I'll never forget the look on Jay's face. It was faking awful. He looked like I'd physically slapped him. Pretty sure he was tearing up too. Nobody laughed and nobody defended him or told me to leave off. They just tried desperately to avoid eye contact and act as if he wasn't sitting there on the verge of crying. Jay just sat there for a good 10 seconds in silence, then slowly got up and left. As far as I know, he didn't talk to anyone in the group again. Good for him. It was a toxic group TBF, and I've not seen him since because he went to a different school, and it was a friend of a friend type of situation. Every time I think about it, I feel sick. I just know he won't ever forget that for the rest of his life. I know I certainly won't. I wish I'd just kept my mouth shut. It didn't matter what he said about my mom. I shouldn't have humiliated him like that. So yeah, watch what you say, because you can't take it back. Had an ex that was emotionally manipulative, some would say abusive, but it didn't bother me enough to consider it so. She was also a spoiled racist cunt thief, but that was just a bonus. So I decided to mentally break her. As I was preparing to end things and move out, I did everything I could to return the favor. I started toying with her feelings, playing into her games, and turning them on her, and ultimately exposing all her shittiness to her family by triggering a mental breakdown in front of them during dinner. Her GPA tanked, she dropped out, lost and gained an unhealthy amount of weight in a super short time, and basically became dependent on others to survive. At that point I left her, and she started self-mutilating. She also attempted suicide a few times, but she also had a habit of faking it to get what she wanted. She even admitted to this after a therapy session she had to go to if she still wanted parental support. Sometimes I feel like nobody deserves to go through that, especially since it was worse than what she put me through. I wanted to give her a taste of her own medicine, but I went too far. I don't know if I would still do things differently or if I really regret it, because she really was an awful person. But I'm definitely the villain in her story, and I definitely went further than I initially planned. Less maybe and more I'm a piece of shit. I was in either my junior or senior year of high school. Sorry, I was on a lot of drugs. I'd been doing this on again, off again thing with the same girl for a couple years. I had this problem where I couldn't stay faithful because I was a piece of human refuse who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as her, and she had some issues as well. Most of the realizations I had about her came in retrospect, but the gist was that she'd dump me for playing hide the pickle with someone else and find solace with another guy. Ick now, attempt to move on, and I'd get all but that and make promises I'd keep until I didn't feel like it anymore. So, we've split for whatever reason. It had been about a month, and she'd started talking to another guy. In an attempt to, I'm assuming, make me jealous, she tells me she gave dude a Hummer on their date. I flip out. Internally of course, gotta keep it cool, right, and go on a bender. At some point during said bender I managed to get her over and sweet talk her into giving us another shot. She puts me on a probationary period. During said period there's various rules I'm supposed to follow. The only relevant one is not to get intoxicated without being around her. Probably because I was faked up was my go-to excuse for douchebaggery. Anyways, as I'm sure you've guessed, I didn't follow said rule. I go to a party. I get trashed at said party and the Xanax and Gija cause my inner douchebag to boil to the surface and my butt to flare up something fierce. I want revenge to quell the butt. I flirt with woman I've been messing with during the breakup with my ex. I receive a blow, job feels good blow, job feels great blow, job feels weird blow, job hurts. I excuse myself from blow, job giver is smiling, very curiously. I check myself in the bathroom. I have a bruise on the tip of my penis. I confront blow, job giver, she's having drinks with her friends. I say, there's a hickey on my dick. Marking your territory, heh. Yeah. I'd kill a beach if she faked you. I go home and Google ways to cover hickeys. They don't work. I tell my girlfriend the new wooden toilet seat bounced back during morning wood and left a bruise. She acts like she buys it. I show up to her house. She seems cool. She's wearing lingerie. She asks to see the bruise. I pull out my penis. She jumps my bones and tells me to remove my clothes. I oblige. She takes me upstairs. We make out. She excuses herself to the bathroom. She's gone a long time. I can smell someone grilling out. It smells nice. She returns to the bedroom. She informs me that she's been in contact with the woman who gave me the hickey. She informs me that my clothes are currently burning in her grill. She hands me my car keys, my phone and her frilly pink robe if she can take a picture. Her house was near a school. She got the picture. As for it hitting her really hard, when I got sober and made amends I got to see it. I left her with a metric fuck ton of baggage. She gave me an earful, and rightfully so. Not only was the revenge shitty, she didn't even deserve it. Also, I was a dick to that other woman too. TLDR, years of being a fuckboy caught up, and she won the revenge by a landslide by getting it in a flashy way and finally leaving my stupid ass. A close friend tried to steal my girlfriend at the time, so I let him insult, humiliate me and focused instead on improving my relationship with her. This was just after Mass Effect 2 was released, and I had been pretty much playing it for almost a week in college whenever I could. Girlfriend at time knew, wasn't too happy, but let me, because she knew I really enjoyed the series. I was used to other guys hitting on her. She was like top 5 of beautiful girls in our nerd group. I got lucky in my opinion. Right place, right time. Anyway, everyone at first sided with him in my social circle and started circling the wagons to kick me out. He wasn't social powerhouse guy, a highly charisma type of guy. No matter, I focused entirely on her even to the failure of a few college courses. And I let time be the factor. The problem he didn't realize was that the longer his insults etc. went on, the more people realized he was full of shit. Then instead, he got kicked out for being toxic. It ended up sending him into a deep depression and mentally broke him. I didn't care at the time, but my girlfriend told me it wasn't right since she knew what I did and how I manipulated the situation to my benefit. I definitely got a lot of social group benefits and jumped up the hierarchy in terms of popularity. I went on a walk around the college for a few hours, running simulations in my head of every possibility I could think of. I ended up realizing she was right and it would be unethical for me to leave him like that. There was a good chance something could go sideways in a bad way. So I had to Humpty Dumpty him back together. Took 3 weeks of talking to him off and on. To this day, I'm still surprised he listened to me despite being the source of all his trouble. Maybe my girlfriend talked him into it. I'm pretty sure I could have devised a way that wouldn't have resulted in mentally breaking someone for that situation if it happened again. Sometimes I think about that crazy year and regret it. I was 11 and my brother was 7. We were at the stage where he had figured out that being an annoying little sheet would earn him attention. My mom told me to ignore it. He had saved up like 1,000 odd tickets from the local arcade over the period of weeks, earned from quarters and birthday money, to finally buy this cool looking plastic sword. It was pretty swell, came with a sheath, and wasn't incredibly chintzy. Point is, he really liked the thing, and played with it all the time. Anyway, he kept following me around, hitting me in the shins, back, and as with it, I asked him to stop to no avail. I passed my complaint up the chain of command, to which my mom said just go outside and play. So when we were playing around outside, he now moved on to stabbing me with the thing. Now, it's plastic. It's not like it was going to cut me, and he was just being gentle. But it was pissing me off, and I had asked him to stop. I warned him that I'd break it if he kept it up. So, naturally, he kept it up. Not wanting to seem weak, I tackled him, sat on his chest, and broke, bent, and spit all over his prized sword. He cried and cried. I could tell he felt fucking terrible, but hey, he called my bluff and lost. In either case, I still regret doing it. Like, it really hurt his feelings, and it was completely unnecessary. I destroyed his most prized possession, and made him watch. Was it annoying? Sure. Was it harming me? No. Not revenge per se. No revenge was involved, although some was attempted. More like karma, that finally caught up with someone. I absolutely ended up thinking, man, I wouldn't have wished that much trouble on her. Hope the story passes muster. TLDR, somewhat annoying landlady gets an absolute avalanche of economic hurt piled on her. I and a few friends had a landlady who was a complete beached person. I will refer to her as the Groke. Not in a spectacularly mean fashion, but petty and consistent attempts at squeezing additional money out of her tenants. We rented a very large house, and were subjected to various unexpected charges. Power bills were twice the amount expected. This information was often withheld until the last possible moment. Regular wear and tear was attempted pulled from the security deposit. Minor repairs caused by us, and promptly fixed, were attempted ballooned into something much more expensive. There was a fair number of angry emails, and unannounced visits with accusations of some imagined wrongdoing. There were also a few threats of lawsuits, unless we paid these claims. Thankfully, a few of us were sufficiently aware of the local laws that we managed to dodge most of this trouble. It did cost us quite a bit of time, effort, and heartache to avoid the worst of the sheet storm. However, I expect that most of her tenants just paid to get rid of the trouble. We attempted to get the local authorities' attention about some blatant tax evasion she was performing, but apparently it was too much small fish material for them to take the trouble to gather evidence. Anyway, we promptly forgot this for about a decade. Then suddenly news comes around that the Groke has been hit by economic catastrophe. You see, the house in question was large, expensive and centrally located in an area that experienced a massive real estate boom. Losing money on this investment should be impossible, even if you just left it empty for 10 years. However, the Groke managed this with gusto. After, I presume, a decade or so of renting out this house to university students and exploiting their naivete to charge them more than the agreed rent, the Groke and her business partner decided to renovate the house. They did this without getting the necessary permits, as the house was antique and subject to some very strict regulations against changes in style. I can only guess that someone else she'd wronged reported her, because the infringing renovations were on the inside of the house. After they'd gutted the house, the authorities arrived on an unannounced inspection. The Groke and her cronies were ordered to return the inside of the house to its original condition. Having gutted the house, they'd killed its resale value, and were unable to secure additional loans for reversing the renovations. At the same time, some illegal and amateur performed digging works on the property, caused a neighboring driveway to collapse in the steep terrain. Being in the neighborhood of the city political elite, the Groke was promptly hit with daily fines to the tune of $5,000 until the driveway was fixed, but of course had no cash to actually perform this work. These fines would likely not have been given in the case of a less well-connected neighborhood, although they were perfectly legal. Long story short, our unfortunate protagonist ended up divorced, lost this $3 million property and actually ended up in the weird communist-inspired form of multi-year voluntary consenting economic slavery that is required to legally declare personal bankruptcy in this part of Europe. All income above a certain limit for a number of years is confiscated to pay off extreme debts, at the end of which these debts are cleared. She ended up not just ruined, but also almost destitute for a long time. This part of the world doesn't allow its inhabitants to starve or end up on the street, but apparently a fair amount of state-sanctioned degradation is regarded as good sport. I would have never wished such a fate on someone for the small and relatively innocuous act of being unreasonable and doing some slightly shady stuff to a few dozen university students. But she must have applied this same attitude to someone much more powerful at some point, and karma caught up with heavy interest. So there was this kid in elementary school I feuded with for literally no good reason. I don't even remember what started it. Either way, he kind of just kept being a dick and making me look stupid to the point where it was just embarrassing for me to talk at all, and all my friends at the time gravitated towards him, and I guess after a certain point I got really jealous of him and saw him as this other that I had to defeat. So one day in 6th grade we were playing a tackling game. It would get violent every now and then, but overall it was mostly just tackle a guy with the ball. However, one incident sticks out in my mind. I saw the kid with the ball, and I had the bright idea of just faking wailing on him. I seized my chance to finally shove my fist into his face, and I delivered a solid punch straight into his nose. However, when he stood up, after I hit him, I could swear he was coming after me with murder in his eyes. Instead, he pushes me out of the way and goes immediately for his best friend. They were wailing on each other, and the whole place just exploded. Next thing I know I was getting tackled, and I didn't see the whole event. Either way, the rest of the recess was just this huge brawl between friend and foe, and on that day not only was our game forever banned, but friendships ended permanently, including the guy who I initially hit and his best friend. Looking back, he deserved to get hit, but I didn't mean to not only get our game completely banned, but I also didn't want to destroy several friendships and cause multiple broken noses and fingers. To this day no one knows that I started that brawl. So this wasn't. Haha, okay, so back in 9th grade, I was friends with a girl from track and field. We would sometimes practice together, and in one of those days, she invited me to Sadie Hawkins. I agreed to go. She also invited some of her friends. We had dinner at some Italian restaurant, Houston, so probably Italian is laugh out loud. There is where I met my would-be girlfriend. Gorgeous chick, funny, and with a very mysterious aura about her. It was love at first sight. A few months later, we were dating, and a few months after that, we were boning. In one of those pillow talk days, she said, I have a confession to make. I only agreed to go out with you so that I could dump you later. It was track and field chick's idea. But I really like you now though, and I said, oh, I've known for a while, I'm just in it for the easy, good sex. Thing is, I didn't know. It caught me completely off guard, and that was the first thing that came to mind. Of course I got dumped right then and there. The fallout was spectacular. Track and field chick and ex-girlfriend got into a massive fight about it. Ex-girlfriend went off the deep end and demanded for track and field chick to have sex with me and be used like a sock like she was. It ended up with my ex-girlfriend changing schools and track and field chick being known as somewhat of a pimp. Me, I stayed single for a while and moved on. 7th grade. I'm a fat ass, lame loner meek nerd. An easy target. She's a transfer student in the middle of the school year and, well, she's just mean. It's her first day at school. During gym class, I'm sitting on the edge of the basketball court counting my pogs. She stomps over to me and says, heard you were talking shit about me. I don't even know who you are. What are you talking about? Don't lie, you know what you said. I did not know who she was, and I had said nothing. I was raised by my parents to walk away from anyone who seems to be trying to fight, so I stood up and turned away to walk off. She grabbed and pulled my ponytail and called me a beach. I turned around and said, fuck you, beach. I don't know who you are, so leave me alone. She took a swing at me. I forgot to mention, I was taught by my kiddie karate instructor to try not to fight, but if you have to defend yourself, you fight. I took a half step forward and planted a foot kick in her abdomen. Steel-toed Doc Martens were in then, and I had mine on that day. The crowd of bored and hormonal adolescents, craving drama, circled us, chanting loudly, "Fight, fight, fight." I backed up a few steps and started to circle her, with my fists up, hot tears streaming down my face. "Bitch," she cried as she fell to her knees. "Break it up. Move. Everyone move out of the way," yelled the coach as he ran from the bleachers to the small mob of screaming teenagers. We broke it up, and I walked past him sobbing, telling him I was going to the office. She was sent to the health room, crying just as hard as I was. The assistant principal suspended me for 5 days, 3 out of school and 2 in school. You sit in a classroom with no windows and do schoolwork all day with a bag lunch from the cafeteria brought to you. She received the same punishment, according to the county rules, but never came back to school to serve her time. The rumor mill started. Gossip spreads as quickly in middle school as wildfire. No one knew who she was, but the truth gathered from the embers. It turns out that she was a foster kid who had bounced from foster home to foster home because of bad behavior. Eventually, everyone forgot who she was. Middle school life moved on. I resumed taking my post at the basketball court, battling my friends for their cardboard milk caps, while talking about the newest singles by Tupac and Biggie, what girl was hooking up with what guy, and who was racking up money selling candy this week after a weekend trip to the Sam's Club with mom and dad for bulk airheads or blow pops. New drama happened daily to keep everyone involved, and totally unfocused on school. In the 10th grade, I walked into chorus class, remember, and took my seat on the risers. I'm chatting with my best friend about N*SYNC, and I suddenly hear, "Oh my god." I turn, face to face with this new girl, and hear her say, "Do you remember me? You kicked me during gym, and made me have miscarriage." I'm now 37 years old, and have 2 living kids, have had 3 second trimester miscarriages, and 1 third trimester miscarriage, and haunted by the fact that I killed an unborn child trying to defend my right to sit quietly during gym, and not bother anyone.